Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I stepped through the rusted entrance, the heavy metal door groaning as it swung open. The air smelled of mildew and decay, the scent thick in my throat. Broken tiles crunched beneath my boots as I took careful steps forward. The asylum had been abandoned for decades, left to rot in silence. Peeling wallpaper revealed dark stains beneath, and shattered glass littered the floor. Faint graffiti covered the walls, remnants of past explorers who had dared to enter. I moved cautiously, my flashlight casting long shadows across the empty halls. The deeper I went, the more the silence pressed in around me. A faint breeze whispered through broken windows, carrying distant echoes of the past. Turning a corner, I spotted a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. The brass plaque above it read "Patient Records," its letters dulled with age. I hesitated before pushing it open, revealing a room filled with toppled filing cabinets and scattered papers. My eyes landed on a leather-bound journal sitting atop a rusted desk. The edges were frayed, and the cover bore deep scratches, as if someone had tried to claw it open. Dust coated the surface, but the pages within seemed untouched. Flipping to the first entry, I skimmed the hurried, uneven handwriting. The words spoke of voices whispering in the dark, unseen figures moving beyond the walls. Each page grew more frantic, the entries descending into paranoia and fear. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned another page, my breath catching at the final line. I am not alone. They watched me from the corners, waiting for me to close my eyes. The ink had smeared, as if the writer's hand had trembled. A sudden thud echoed down the hall, making my pulse spike. I snapped the journal shut, my ears straining in the suffocating silence. The noise had come from somewhere beyond the door, too deliberate to be the building settling. I stepped cautiously back into the hallway, scanning the shadows ahead. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering before stabilizing. A chill crept along my spine, the feeling of being watched tightening around me. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with darkened doorways leading into forgotten rooms. My footsteps felt too loud, the sound bouncing against the crumbling walls. The air grew colder as I pressed forward, drawn deeper by an unseen force. Another noise echoed, this time closer, a soft shuffle against the tiled floor. I swallowed hard, gripping the journal tightly in my hands. My flashlight swept across the hallway, landing on a door at the far end, its frame slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I found myself in what looked like an old common room. Broken chairs lay scattered, their cushions torn open and stuffing spilling out. A single wheelchair stood upright in the center, its wheels rusted but facing the door. The walls bore deep scratches, long claw-like marks gouged into the peeling paint. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath fogging slightly in the air. The sense of unease clawed at my chest, warning me to leave. I turned back toward the hallway, but a movement in the corner of my vision made me freeze. The wheelchair had shifted, its wheels creaking slightly as it tilted forward. My pulse pounded as I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The journal felt heavier in my hands, the weight of its words pressing down on me. Something about it felt wrong, like I had taken something I wasn't meant to. The air in the room thickened, a low hum vibrating through the walls. A whisper brushed against my ear, too faint to make out but close enough to send ice through my veins. I spun around, my flashlight beam darting wildly across the room. The space was empty, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. I forced myself to move, stepping quickly back into the hallway. The journal pulsed in my grip, as if the words within carried a lingering presence. The darkness around me seemed to shift, shapes pressing at the edges of my vision. The hallway stretched longer than before, the walls closing in. My breaths came quicker, the air growing stale with the scent of something rotting. My flashlight flickered again, casting jagged shadows along the cracked floor. A door slammed somewhere behind me, the sudden noise sending a jolt of fear through my chest. I quickened my pace, my boots echoing too loudly in the suffocating quiet. Something moved in the periphery of my vision, just beyond the reach of my light. I reached the entrance, my heart pounding against my ribs. The heavy door stood slightly ajar, just as I had left it. I pushed forward, eager to escape the suffocating weight pressing down on me. As I stepped outside, the night air felt too still, the usual sounds of the forest muted. The journal burned cold against my palm, its presence unwilling to be forgotten. A single whisper echoed from the asylum behind me, soft but unmistakable. "Leave it." I hesitated, my fingers gripping the journal tightly. A deep unease settled in my chest, the sensation of unseen eyes following my every movement. The building loomed in the darkness, its empty windows like hollow eyes staring back at me. For a long moment I debated returning the journal to where I had found it. My gut screamed that I had taken something that did not belong to me. But something in me refused to let go, curiosity clawing at reason. I turned away, forcing myself to walk back toward my car. Each step felt heavier, as if something unseen lingered just behind me. The journal remained clutched in my hands, its weight growing unbearable. As I reached my car, the engine roared to life, breaking the silence. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. In the rearview mirror, the asylum stood in the distance, its darkened windows unchanging. Just as I shifted into drive, movement caught my eye. A figure stood in one of the broken windows, barely visible in the dim light. It did not move, did not shift, only watched as I pulled away. I drove through the winding road, the asylum fading behind me. The journal sat beside me on the passenger seat, its cover worn but unassuming. Yet, the whispers had not stopped, lingering at the edges of my thoughts. That night I placed the journal on my desk, determined to read it in full. As I opened it again, a chill swept through the room, an unseen presence settling in the air. The ink on the last page was no longer smeared. Story 2. After sneaking into a deserted factory, I started hearing faint knocking sounds from behind the walls, except I was sure I was the only one there. The air was thick with dust, and the faint glow of my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The factory had been abandoned for years, its machinery rusted and forgotten, yet the sound persisted. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone or something was signaling. I stood still, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to pinpoint the source. The knocking came from behind a metal panel on the far wall, just past a row of overturned crates. I stepped closer, my footsteps echoing in the empty space, making me feel even more exposed. The moment I reached out to touch the panel, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than before. I pressed my ear to the metal, straining to hear anything beyond it. At first, there was nothing, just the steady hum of my own breathing. Then, just as I was about to pull away, a whisper, barely audible, sent a shiver down my spine. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The voice had been too soft to make out the words, but there was no mistaking its presence. Someone was behind that wall, and they had just spoken to me. The rational part of my mind told me to leave, to turn back and never return, but I found myself unable to move. The factory had always been a mystery, a relic of a time when it had once thrived before abruptly shutting down. Rumors about missing workers and unexplained disappearances surrounded the place, turning it into a local legend. I had dismissed them as nothing more than ghost stories, but now, standing here, I wasn't so sure. Something was here, something that didn't want me to leave. The knocking resumed, faster this time, urgent and insistent. I reached out and pressed my palm against the panel, unsure of what I was hoping to find. The moment my skin touched the cold metal, a deep, resounding thud shook the wall. It felt like something was trying to break through. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat, watching as the panel vibrated slightly. The sound of scraping metal filled the air, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging against steel. I turned my flashlight towards the ground, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a rusted pipe, though I had no idea what good it would do. Then, without warning, the knocking stopped once more. The silence was even worse than the noise, stretching out long enough to make my skin crawl. I took a hesitant step forward, the urge to uncover the truth warring with the instinct to flee. Before I could decide, a single word drifted through the still air from behind the panel. "Help." It was a whisper, strained and desperate, but unmistakable. My grip on the pipe tightened as my mind raced through every possibility. Was this a trick? A recording set to lure in trespassers? Or was there really someone trapped inside? The thought made my stomach turn, but I couldn't just walk away. I ran my fingers along the panel's edges, searching for a latch or hinge. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that made the factory feel even more sinister. The air smelled of rust and decay, a reminder that this place had been forgotten for a reason. Then, just as I was about to give up, my fingers found a small gap near the bottom. I crouched down, wedging my fingers into the space and pulling with all my strength. The metal groaned in protest, resisting me at first before finally giving way. Dust spilled into the air as the panel shifted, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passageway. A stale, suffocating scent wafted from the opening, thick and heavy, like something long buried had just been unearthed. I hesitated, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the darkness ahead. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but that voice, it had been real. Swallowing my fear, I stepped inside, crouching low as I moved forward. The passageway was tight, forcing me to shuffle through hunched over, my breath shallow as the walls seemed to close in around me. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, unnatural for a place that had been sealed off for years. My flashlight flickered again, and I smacked it against my palm, desperate to keep the light steady. That's when I saw them faint, smudged handprints along the walls, as if someone had clawed at the surface. Some were old, faded by time, but others looked fresh. A chill ran down my spine as I pressed forward, my ears straining for any sign of movement. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the unknown. Then, without warning, my flashlight flickered one last time before going out completely. The darkness swallowed me whole. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it in a desperate attempt to bring it back to life. My breathing was loud, too loud, echoing in the confined space. Then I heard it breathing, but it wasn't mine. It was slow, labored, coming from just ahead of me. I froze, my fingers tightening around the useless flashlight, my body unwilling to move. The breathing grew louder, uneven, almost as if whoever or whatever it belonged to was struggling to hold on. Then a voice, closer than before, whispered again, "Please don't leave." My pulse thundered in my ears as I took a shaky step forward. My fingers brushed against something solid, rough fabric, trembling beneath my touch. Before I could react, cold fingers wrapped around my wrist, weak but insistent. A gasp escaped me as I jerked back, nearly losing my balance. The grip loosened almost immediately, and the breathing grew fainter, as though the person, if it even was a person, was fading. A surge of urgency overtook my fear as I reached forward again. My fingers found flesh, too thin, too cold, and I grabbed hold. Summoning all my strength, I pulled, dragging them toward the passage's entrance. They didn't resist, their body limp, barely clinging to consciousness. Step by step, I retraced my way out, my breath ragged as the weight in my arms grew heavier. At last, I reached the factory floor, stumbling back into the open air. The figure in my arms was little more than a shadow, their face gaunt and unrecognizable in the dim light. They trembled, their breaths shallow, but they were alive. I reached for my phone, my fingers numb as I dialed for help. As the call connected, I glanced back at the passage, at the darkness that had nearly swallowed us both. The factory had held its secret for years, but I had finally uncovered it. Story 3. It was supposed to be a quick visit to an old, derelict prison, but when I found fresh footprints in the dust, I knew someone else was watching me. The place had been abandoned for decades, its walls crumbling and rust coating the iron bars. I had come alone, drawn by the eerie history and the stories of strange occurrences within its decaying halls. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional sound of dripping water from some unseen source. I knelt to inspect the footprints, my breath hitching as I realized they were too recent. The fine layer of dust had been disturbed, the marks crisp and clear, leading deeper into the prison. My pulse quickened as I debated whether to follow them or turn back while I still could. The sensible part of me screamed to leave, but curiosity had a grip on me, stronger than fear. I took cautious steps forward, my boots echoing in the vast emptiness of the cell block. The air smelled of mildew and rust, a suffocating combination that made my skin crawl. My flashlight flickered slightly, casting long shadows along the walls where old graffiti whispered of long-forgotten despair. Every step I took brought me closer to something unseen, something waiting. The footprints led me past rows of open cells, their iron doors hanging loose on rusted hinges. Some still had remnants of their past mattresses stripped to their frames, scattered papers, and rotting furniture. The deeper I ventured, the colder it became, as if the building itself rejected my presence. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, my nerves buzzing with unease. A sound broke the silence, a slow, deliberate shuffling ahead of me. My body froze, every muscle tensing as I listened. It wasn't the scurrying of a rat or the wind through broken windows, it was footsteps, matching my own hesitant pace. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, drawn forward despite the dread curling in my stomach. I reached what must have been the solitary confinement wing, the cells smaller and lined with reinforced steel doors. The footprints stopped abruptly in front of one cell, the dust disturbed as if someone had stood there for a long time. I hesitated before shining my flashlight inside, expecting to find nothing but emptiness. Instead, I saw something impossible. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, and on it, a set of shackles lay open, their metal gleaming as if recently touched. The air felt thick, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. My skin prickled as I stepped back, every instinct telling me I had overstayed my welcome. Then, from the darkness beyond the cells, I heard my name. It was barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. My flashlight flickered again, and this time I swore I saw movement in my peripheral vision. My throat went dry as I turned sharply, scanning the hallway for whoever had spoken. There was no one there, but I knew I was not alone. I moved quickly, retracing my steps, trying to ignore the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The prison seemed different now, the walls pressing in tighter, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. My heart pounded as I hurried back through the cell block, my footsteps too loud in the silence. Then, just as I reached the main corridor, I saw them. A pair of bare footprints appeared ahead of me, forming one after the other in the dust. They were not mine. They were fresh, materializing as if someone unseen was walking toward me. I stumbled backward, barely managing to keep my balance as the air grew colder. The weight of unseen eyes bore into me, suffocating in its intensity. A low creak sounded from behind, and I whipped around to see one of the cell doors inching open. My flashlight caught the glint of movement, a shadow pulling away from the darkness. I didn't stay to see more. Adrenaline surged through me as I turned and ran, my boots kicking up dust, my breath ragged and desperate. The exit was just ahead, the heavy metal doors still ajar from when I entered. My fingers grazed the cold surface, but before I could push through, the door slammed shut with a deafening clang. I yanked at the handle, my hands shaking, but it wouldn't budge. Something didn't want me to leave. A whispering murmur filled the air, surrounding me, overlapping voices too faint to understand. My back pressed against the door as I swept my flashlight across the hall. Shadows shifted unnaturally, moving against the dim light, taking forms that made my stomach churn. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to disappear. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noises stopped. The air lightened, the pressure in my chest lifting. I turned the handle again, and this time it gave way with ease. The door groaned open, revealing the night beyond, the cool breeze hitting my face like a lifeline. I didn't look back as I stepped outside. I hurried to my car, my hands fumbling with the keys as I slid into the driver's seat. My fingers trembled as I started the engine, the headlights illuminating the crumbling structure one last time. In one of the high, barred windows, I saw a figure standing still, watching me. My stomach dropped as I realized it had no face. I didn't wait to understand. The tires kicked up gravel as I sped away, the prison shrinking in my rearview mirror. My heart pounded in my chest. The image of the faceless figure seared into my mind. I promised myself I would never return, but deep down I knew it wasn't finished with me. Story 4. The old school had been abandoned for decades, its windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. I had heard stories about it, whispers of strange occurrences and eerie sounds echoing through the empty halls. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to explore it alone, stepping over broken glass and rotting wood as I ventured inside. The air was thick with dust, and every step I took sent echoes bouncing off the crumbling walls. Lockers stood ajar, their rusted doors hanging loosely from broken hinges. Faded posters still clung to the walls, their messages about school spirit and hard work now ironic in the midst of decay. As I moved further into the building, I reached a hallway lined with classrooms, their doors left wide open. The faint scent of mildew and something metallic filled the air, making my stomach churn. I hesitated for a moment before stepping into one of the rooms, my flashlight flickering as I scanned the interior. Desks were overturned, their wooden frames covered in thick layers of dust. The chalkboard at the front of the room was smeared with something dark, as if someone had tried to write on it with their fingers. Then I noticed the papers scattered across the floor, each one marked with smeared red writing. I knelt down, picking up one of the sheets with trembling fingers. The words were uneven, scratched into the paper as though written in a frenzy. "Don't let him in," it read. "Ain't no. The blood still dark and fresh." My pulse quickened as I scanned the other papers around me. Every single page was filled with similar warnings, each more frantic than the last. She sees me, I can't run, and these eye on the walls were repeated over and over again. Some messages were barely legible, the letters trailing off into smudges as if the writer had been pulled away mid-sentence. A chill ran down my spine as I turned my flashlight to the far corner of the room. A desk sat upright, its chair pulled out slightly as if someone had just been sitting there. Unlike the others, this desk was clean, free of dust and decay. The sight of it made my skin crawl. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, pressing against my chest like an unseen force. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Something about this place was deeply wrong, and every instinct screamed for me to leave. As I turned toward the door, a soft creak echoed through the silent room. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement near the chalkboard. I froze, gripping the light tighter as I tried to steady my breathing. The room was empty, but the unease gnawed at me, growing stronger by the second. I backed toward the hallway, refusing to turn my back completely. My foot brushed against one of the scattered papers, and I forced myself not to look down. Just as I reached the door, a whisper drifted through the air, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Don't let him in." The words sent a sharp jolt of fear through me, and I bolted into the hallway without hesitation. The corridor stretched ahead, dark and endless, every shadow seeming to shift as I moved. I didn't care about being quiet anymore, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. I just needed to get out, to put as much distance between me and that classroom as possible. A sudden noise behind me made me stop cold. It was a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction I had just fled. I turned my flashlight back toward the room, the beam shaking from the tremor in my hands. The doorway was empty, but the sound continued, growing closer. My pulse thundered in my ears as I forced my legs to move, breaking into a full sprint toward the exit. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, the air thick with something unseen but undeniably present. I reached the main hall, my lungs burning as I struggled to catch my breath. The front doors were just ahead, slightly ajar as if inviting me to leave. But as I took another step forward, the whisper returned, closer this time. "He's in the walls." A cold dread settled in my gut as the walls around me seemed to groan, the sound deep and unnatural. I could feel something watching me, hidden just out of sight. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. Then, the whisper turned into a rasping breath, coming from just behind me. I spun around, my flashlight casting a frantic beam of light. But there was nothing there. The air had turned ice cold, my skin prickling with fear. Finally, my body obeyed and I lunged for the exit, pushing through the doors and stumbling into the night. The moment I crossed the threshold, the heavy feeling lifted, the oppressive air vanishing as if it had never been there. I turned back, expecting to see something standing in the doorway, but the school remained eerily still. The whispers were gone, the dragging sound silenced. Only the distant rustling of the wind filled the empty night air. I didn't wait to catch my breath, forcing myself to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between me and that cursed place. Even as I reached the safety of my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left alone. The whispers still echoed in my mind, their frantic warnings playing over and over. And as I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of the school in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw something standing in the window of that classroom. A dark figure, watching, waiting. Story 5. The station had been abandoned for decades, its entrance swallowed by overgrown vines and rusting metal. I had stumbled across it while wandering through the outskirts of town, drawn by the eerie silence that surrounded it. The crumbling facade bore the name of a station long erased from maps, a place people seemed to have forgotten existed. As stepping inside, I was met with the stale scent of damp concrete and decay. The platform stretched into the darkness, littered with broken glass and old newspapers that had turned brittle with time. The remnants of a bygone era were everywhere, faded posters peeling from the walls, a rusted ticket booth standing frozen in time. I made my way down the platform, my footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. The silence was oppressive, thick with an unsettling weight, as if the station itself was holding its breath. A set of tracks disappeared into the darkness, leading toward a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly. Curiosity got the better of me, and I climbed down onto the tracks, feeling the crunch of gravel beneath my feet. The entrance to the tunnel loomed ahead, its gaping mouth swallowing what little light remained. As I stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic. The deeper I went, the more I noticed strange markings along the tunnel walls. They were crudely drawn, almost primitive, depicting figures with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. My flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Then I heard a faint rustling in the darkness ahead. It was soft at first, like fabric dragging across stone, but it grew louder, closer. My pulse quickened as I realized I was not alone. The tunnel was no longer empty. A dim glow flickered ahead, the faint orange light of a fire dancing against the damp walls. I crept forward, my breath shallow, until I saw them. A group of people huddled around makeshift fires, their faces obscured by grime and shadows. They wore ragged clothing, their bodies thin and gaunt, their movements slow and deliberate. One of them looked up, their sunken eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. The others followed, their expressions unreadable, their silence more unnerving than any words could have been. They did not move toward me, but there was no welcome in their gazes. I took a step back, my foot dislodging a small rock that skittered noisily across the ground. The sound was deafening in the stillness, and the figures flinched, their bodies tensing. One of them, a man with hollow cheeks and long, tangled hair, rose to his feet, tilting his head as if listening for something. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Turning sharply, I retraced my steps, moving as quickly as I dared without breaking into a run. The tunnel felt much longer than before, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Behind me, the sound of footsteps began to follow. They were not hurried, but they were deliberate, growing closer with each passing second. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs. The entrance was still far away, the station beyond it an unreachable sanctuary. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with something unspoken. I risked a glance over my shoulder, my pulse roaring in my ears. The figures had stopped a few paces behind me, their forms barely visible in the dim light. The man who had stood first raised a single hand, his fingers curling in a slow, deliberate motion. It was not a wave, nor a beckoning, it was a warning. I understood then that I was an intruder, that I had wandered too far into a place where I did not belong. I turned back toward the entrance, forcing myself to move at a steady pace. My legs ached to run, but I knew better. Whatever unspoken rule I had broken, I could not afford to break another. The figures remained where they were, watching, waiting. When I finally stepped out of the tunnel and back onto the tracks, the air felt lighter, less oppressive. The station was just as empty as before, but it no longer felt abandoned. I could feel unseen eyes on me, lingering, ensuring that I left and did not return. I climbed back onto the platform, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge. The silence of the station was no longer comforting, it was expectant, a pause before something resumed. I did not linger. As I stepped outside, the sunlight felt foreign, too bright after the suffocating darkness of the tunnel. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the weight of what I had seen. The figures had not spoken a word, yet their message had been clear. I never went back to that station, though its presence lingered at the edges of my mind. I often wondered how long they had been there, living in the depths where no one dared to look. They had made their home in the forgotten tunnels, a world separate from the one above. Whatever they were, they had no interest in company, and I had no interest in testing their patience. Story 6. Walking through the vacant hospital, I could feel the weight of silence pressing down on me. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. My footsteps echoed down the dimly lit corridor, the overhead lights flickering sporadically as if resisting their own decay. The building had been abandoned for years, yet it felt as if it had never truly been left alone. The peeling wallpaper and broken ceiling tiles told stories of neglect, but there were signs of disturbance. Scattered footprints in the dust led further into the hall, some fresh, some faded. The unsettling sense that I was not the only one here made my skin prickle. I moved cautiously, peering into rooms as I passed. Most were empty, their beds stripped and equipment removed, but others held remnants of the past, scattered files, rusted gurneys, forgotten patient belongings. One door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar, a dull light spilling from within. The sight of it sent a chill through me, but curiosity pulled me forward. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside and immediately froze. In the center of the room stood an old surgical table, its surface marred with deep scratches and dark stains. Surrounding it were rusted instruments laid out with unsettling precision, as if waiting to be used. The air was thick with the acrid scent of something unnatural, something that didn't belong in a place long abandoned. A metal tray sat beside the table, holding scalpels, clamps, and saws that gleamed despite the dust covering the rest of the room. My pulse quickened as I took a closer look. Some of the tools bore traces of something dark, something fresh. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Someone had been using them recently. I backed away, my breath uneven as my mind raced for an explanation. No squatters or vandals would have reason to set up something like this. The silence in the room felt heavier now, pressing in as if unseen eyes were watching. A faint sound echoed from the hall, a distant scrape against the floor. I turned sharply, scanning the doorway for movement. The corridor outside remained empty, but the feeling of being observed lingered. My heart pounded as I debated my next move: leave and pretend I had never seen this, or stay and uncover who had been using this place. The wrong choice could mean danger, but I wasn't ready to leave just yet. Forcing myself to stay calm, I examined the instruments again, searching for any clues. A faded cloth rested beneath the tools, its edges damp with something I didn't want to identify. Beside it, a notebook sat partially open, filled with cramped handwriting and crude sketches. The words blurred together in the dim light, but one phrase stood out: the procedure must continue. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The notes detailed experiments, attempts at something grotesque and unnatural. There were dates, some recent, others from years ago. Whoever had written this had been coming here for a long time. The realization sent a wave of unease through me, my body urging me to leave before I discovered something worse. A sudden noise outside made my breath hitch. It was closer this time, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on tile. I quickly shut the notebook and stepped away from the table, my pulse hammering in my ears. Someone was here, and they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. The hallway stretched before me, eerily empty, but the sound continued a slow, deliberate approach. I stepped backward, my hands fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. The sharp edge of a scalpel brushed my fingers, its cold steel grounding me for a brief moment. The lights overhead flickered again, casting long, shifting shadows across the floor. A shape emerged at the end of the corridor, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the dim light. My breath caught in my throat as it remained motionless, watching. I didn't wait to see what it would do. Spinning on my heel, I bolted down the hall, the sound of my footsteps mingling with the erratic hum of the failing lights. The air felt thicker now, the walls pressing in as if trying to trap me. My only thought was getting out before whoever or whatever was behind me caught up. Reaching the stairwell, I flung the door open and stumbled inside. The metal railing was slick with condensation, an odd detail that barely registered in my panic. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning as I forced myself to keep moving. A crash echoed from above, followed by hurried steps that sent a fresh surge of fear through me. The lobby was within sight, the broken glass doors a beacon of escape. I pushed forward, every muscle in my body screaming to move faster. Just as I reached the exit, a voice rang out behind me, low, guttural, and wrong. It wasn't a word, more of a sound, something between a growl and a whisper. It made my skin crawl. I didn't stop to look back. Bursting through the doors, I stumbled onto the cracked pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night air was sharp against my sweat-damp skin, but I welcomed the chill. The hospital loomed behind me, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching my retreat. I didn't slow down until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as my hands shook. Once inside, I locked the doors and gripped the steering wheel, my heart still hammering. The figure had never fully emerged, but I knew it had been real. Someone had been in that hospital, someone who had been using those tools, and they had been watching me. As I sped away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have been left alone. The hospital had been abandoned, but it was far from empty, and whoever had been there before me would likely return, continuing whatever twisted work they had started. Story 7. In an abandoned mansion, I discovered a room that hadn't been touched for decades except for one item, a child's drawing, freshly hung on the wall. The paper was crisp, unstained by time, and the crayon strokes were bold and recent. It depicted a small girl with long hair standing beside a towering figure with hollow eyes. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the ink of the name at the bottom lily was still slightly wet. The room itself was frozen in time, dust covering every surface except for the spot where the drawing hung. The furniture was antique, its wooden legs cracked with age, and the wallpaper had curled away in places, exposing the skeletal frame of the mansion. A small, ornate bed sat in the corner, the mattress caved in, as if untouched for years. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly sweet, like forgotten perfume. I reached out and touched the drawing, half expecting the colors to smudge beneath my fingertips. Instead, the paper felt cold, almost damp, as though it had been placed there moments ago. A sudden creak behind me made me turn sharply, but the doorway was empty. The silence in the house deepened, thick and suffocating, as if something unseen had become aware of my presence. I glanced back at the drawing, my pulse quickening. Something about the towering figure in the sketch unsettled me. It seemed to loom over the child, its long fingers stretched unnaturally. The more I stared, the more I felt like I was being watched, as though the hollow eyes in the drawing were observing me in return. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but something rooted me to the spot. I took a step back, my foot disturbing a thick layer of dust on the floor. The dust swirled in the air, revealing faint footprints leading to the bed, small, like those of a child. But there was no exit trail, as if whoever had left them had never walked away. My breath hitched as a soft giggle echoed through the room, light and distant, yet unmistakable. Spinning around, I scanned the shadows, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sound had come from the far corner, where a broken toy chest lay overturned. I forced myself to approach, nudging the lid open with my foot. Inside, a collection of old dolls and stuffed animals lay motionless, their glass eyes dull and lifeless. But nestled among them was something out of place, a single red crayon. I knelt, hesitating before picking it up. The wax was smooth, unused except for its slightly blunted tip, as if it had just been set down. A faint breath of cold air passed over my neck, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Before I could move, a soft voice whispered from behind me, "Do you like my picture?" My body went rigid. Slowly, I turned my head, expecting to see someone standing there. But the room was empty, save for the still furniture and decaying wallpaper. My hands clenched around the crayon as a sharp chill settled in my chest. The voice had been close, so close it had almost tickled my ear. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady beneath me. The drawing on the wall looked different now, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The child's face seemed slightly altered, her eyes wider, her expression more fearful. And the figure beside her, its hollow eyes seemed darker, deeper, as if something within them had shifted. I backed away toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the sketch. My heart pounded as the floor groaned beneath my weight, the sound stretching unnaturally, like a low moan. Just as I reached the threshold, I heard it again, another giggle, this time closer. It came from the bed. With slow, careful steps, I turned my gaze toward the sagging mattress. The dust there had been disturbed, as if someone had recently sat upon it. A single indentation remained, impossibly fresh. My breathing turned shallow as I fought the overwhelming urge to flee. Then, in the dim light, I noticed something that hadn't been there before, a crumpled piece of paper resting on the pillow. Swallowing hard, I reached for it, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. The drawing was nearly identical to the one on the wall, but with one terrifying difference. This time the child was alone. A sharp knock sounded behind me, making me jump. The sound hadn't come from the open doorway, but from inside the room, as though something had rapped against the wall. The air pressed in around me, thick and suffocating, carrying with it the faint scent of something rotten. My instinct screamed at me to run. I stumbled backward into the hallway, my breath ragged. As I turned to flee, I caught one last glimpse of the room. The drawing on the wall had changed again, the towering figure had returned, its hollow eyes staring directly at me. The red crayon now rested on the floor beneath it, rolling slowly toward the doorway. I didn't wait to see more. I ran through the corridors, the once silent house now alive with whispers and distant footsteps. The walls seemed to close in, the air colder with every step. By the time I reached the front door, my hands were shaking too hard to grip the handle properly. I shoved the door open, gasping as I stumbled into the overgrown yard. The mansion loomed behind me, its broken windows like hollow eyes peering into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with my keys before speeding away down the long abandoned road. Even as the house faded in the distance, a single thought haunted me. That drawing had changed twice while I was in the room. If I had stayed longer, would it have changed again? And if so, would I still have been in it? I refused to look back, even as a cold whisper echoed in my ears, soft and playful. Come back. I need to finish my picture. Story 8. The abandoned factory loomed in the distance, its rusted metal walls covered in ivy. I had passed by it for years, always wondering what was inside. Curiosity finally got the better of me, and one night I slipped through a broken side door, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of mildew clinging to every surface. I moved carefully, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Broken machinery lay scattered across the floor, rusted gears and tangled wires forming eerie shapes in the dim light. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the occasional creak of shifting metal. As I wandered deeper, I noticed a single door at the end of a hallway, its surface oddly clean compared to the rest of the decaying factory. I reached for the handle, only to find it locked. Something about the door felt out of place, as if it didn't belong in this forgotten ruin. The metal was smooth and polished, free of rust or grime. My fingers traced over it, my curiosity growing stronger with each passing second. Glancing around, I spotted a rusted crowbar among the debris and picked it up. Wedge by wedge, I pried at the door, gritting my teeth as it resisted. The lock finally gave way with a sharp crack, the sound reverberating through the empty space. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open, my flashlight sweeping across the room beyond. Rows of mannequins stood in eerie stillness, their glassy eyes catching the light. They were arranged in a perfect circle, each one posed in unnatural stances. Some had their arms raised as if reaching for something unseen, while others knelt on the floor with their heads bowed. A strange feeling crept up my spine, an instinctive dread settling in my gut. The mannequins were too lifelike, their features unnervingly detailed. Their skin had a slight sheen, their lips parted as if caught mid-whisper. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, inspecting their hands. The fingernails looked real, complete with tiny ridges and imperfections. My stomach turned as a chilling thought formed in my mind. I forced myself to remain calm, scanning the room for any explanation. In the center of the mannequins lay a small wooden box, its lid slightly ajar. I hesitated before kneeling down and pushing it open. Inside, I found a pile of old photographs, their edges curled with age. The images showed people in the same poses as the mannequins, their expressions frozen in terror. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I flipped through the photos. Each face was eerily familiar, though I couldn't place where I had seen them before. The last picture made my blood run cold. It was a photo of me, standing at the entrance of the factory. My hand trembled, the flashlight wobbling in my grip as I tried to understand what I was seeing. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest as I heard a faint rustling behind me. I turned sharply, my light bouncing off the mannequins. They hadn't moved, yet something felt different, as if they were watching me now. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting along the walls like grasping fingers. A creak echoed through the room, low and deliberate. My breath hitched as I realized the door behind me had shut on its own. I sprinted toward it, my hands fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The scent of something rotten filled the air, the sickly sweet stench clinging to my throat. The mannequins seemed closer now, their positions slightly altered. One that had been kneeling was now standing, its head tilted toward me. Another had shifted its arm, its fingers extended as if reaching for my shoulder. My pulse thundered as I backed away, my flashlight flickering in my grasp. A whisper filled the air, low and breathy, though I couldn't make out the words. The mannequins pressed closer, their frozen faces just inches away. Their eyes, though lifeless, seemed to glisten in the dim light. My body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Desperation clawed at my mind as I slammed my shoulder against the door, The wood barely budged, my strength useless against whatever force held it shut. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices weaving into a distorted chant. My vision blurred as dizziness overtook me, my body growing weaker by the second. Then, everything went silent. The air stilled, the heavy pressure lifting from my chest. I turned, my breath catching as I saw the mannequins back in their original positions. The circle was unbroken. The figures once again frozen mid-ritual. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, the beam casting sharp shadows across the walls. I didn't hesitate. With one final push, the door gave way, sending me stumbling into the hallway. I sprinted through the factory, my lungs burning as I navigated the maze of rusted debris. The moment I crossed the threshold, the night air hit me like a slap, fresh and cool against my sweat-drenched skin. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs ached, until the factory was nothing more than a silhouette against the dark sky. Only when I reached my car did I stop, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the keys. The moment the engine roared to life, I peeled out of there, my heart hammering in my chest. Sleep didn't come easy that night. My mind replayed the images of the mannequins, their eerily realistic hands, the whispering voices. The photograph of me at the factory haunted me most, a question burning in my thoughts. Someone had been expecting me. The next day, I convinced myself to return in the daylight, hoping the factory would seem less terrifying. But when I arrived, I found nothing but an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. The factory was gone, as if it had never existed. The only thing left was a single mannequin, standing in the grass, its hand raised in a silent farewell. Story 9. The mall had been abandoned for years, left to decay as nature crept in through shattered skylights and broken windows. I liked the silence, the way my footsteps echoed through the empty halls, untouched by crowds or commerce. It was my escape from the noise of the world, a place where I could think without interruption. Each time I visited, I wandered deeper, learning the layout like the back of my hand. The food court still smelled faintly of grease and soda, though the counters were coated in dust. Faded posters clung to the walls, peeling at the edges, their bright colors muted by time. A few toppled chairs lay scattered across the floor, remnants of a forgotten rush of customers long gone. I often sat there, listening to the quiet hum of nothingness, letting the stillness wrap around me. Yesterday I had explored the lower level, weaving through the remains of clothing racks and shattered display cases. The dim emergency lights cast long shadows that stretched and twisted with each step I took. At times, the silence felt too thick, like something unseen was pressing against my skin. I shook the feeling off, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I had found the security office tucked away near an old department store, its door slightly ajar. Inside, dust-coated monitors sat stacked on one another, some screens flickering weakly. A few still worked, cycling through grainy footage of the darkened hallways. The sight of the mall from another perspective fascinated me, a glimpse into a forgotten world frozen in time. Curious, I rewound the footage from the night before, expecting to see nothing but empty halls. The timestamp flickered as the images rolled back, showing the food court where I had been sitting just hours earlier. I watched myself wander through the mall, the small glow of my flashlight bouncing against the walls. But then, something moved behind me, something I hadn't noticed while I was there. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat as I paused the footage. A dark figure stood several feet behind me, partially hidden in the shadows. It wasn't just an illusion or a trick of the light. The shape was solid, distinct, unmistakably human. My stomach twisted as I hit play again, watching as the figure followed my every step. I scrolled further back, trying to see where it had come from, but the cameras never showed its approach. One second the halls were empty, then suddenly it was there. The way it moved was unnatural, slow and deliberate, never rushing yet always staying just far enough behind me. A chill crawled up my spine as I realized that whatever it was, it had been watching me the entire time. My pulse pounded in my ears as I shut off the monitors and backed out of the security office. The silence of the mall felt heavier now, thick with something unseen. I turned my flashlight toward the entrance, my every instinct screaming at me to leave. Each step felt agonizingly slow, like I was wading through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I neared the food court, a noise broke the silence, a faint scuff of movement from behind. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I turned my head slightly. There was nothing there, just the empty stretch of hallways leading deeper into the mall. But I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I picked up my pace, resisting the urge to run, knowing that sudden movement would only make my fear worse. The exit was just ahead, the shattered glass doors glinting faintly in the moonlight. I stepped outside, my body shivering despite the warm night air. The moment I was out, I turned around, scanning the darkness behind me. Nothing moved. The mall stood silent, just as abandoned as it had always been. But I knew what I had seen, I hadn't imagined it. Something had been inside with me, lurking in the shadows, watching without making a sound. And somehow, it had disappeared without a trace. I barely slept that night, my mind replaying the footage over and over again. The way the figure followed, always just out of reach, made my skin crawl. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't explain it away. The mall had always felt like my sanctuary, but now it felt like something else entirely. Morning came, but the unease didn't fade. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that it wasn't worth the risk. But as the day wore on, curiosity gnawed at me, demanding answers. By the time the sun began to set, I found myself driving back to the mall, unable to stay away. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and mildew, just as it had always been. I moved cautiously, my flashlight sweeping over the hallways, searching for anything out of place. Each step echoed too loudly, my own presence feeling intrusive now. The mall wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to something else. I forced myself to walk toward the security office, my heart hammering with each passing second. The monitors were still there, the screen still flickering, waiting. I hesitated before reaching for the controls, my fingers trembling slightly as I rewound the footage. The grainy images played once more, showing me as I had left the night before, rushing toward the exit. But as I scanned the footage further, I saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. The figure was back, standing near the entrance, just watching. My blood turned to ice as I realized what was different. The figure wasn't following me anymore. It was standing still, as if waiting for me to return. And now I was here again, right where I wanted me to be. A sharp noise echoed from the hall outside, a sound too deliberate to be a coincidence. I turned off the monitors, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I gripped my flashlight tighter. My only thought now was getting out, getting as far away as possible. I moved quickly, my footsteps barely making a sound as I made my way back through the mall. Every shadow seemed darker now, every corner hiding something unseen. The air felt heavier, pressing against me like an unseen force. I didn't dare look behind me. The entrance was just ahead, the outside world waiting beyond the broken glass doors. But as I reached them, I caught something from the corner of my eye movement, just a fraction of a second too late. I turned my head, my flashlight trembling as I lifted it. There, standing at the edge of the food court, was the figure. Closer now, clearer than before. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details beyond its towering silhouette. But I didn't need to. I knew deep in my bones that it was looking right at me. I stumbled back, shoving the doors open and practically falling outside. The second I hit the pavement, I turned, expecting to see the figure standing in the doorway. But there was nothing, just the empty, rotting husk of the mall behind me. I didn't stay to question it. I ran to my car, heart hammering so hard I thought it might stop. I didn't look back as I sped away, my mind screaming at me to never return. The mall had been my refuge, my escape from the world. But now, I knew the truth. I had never been alone in there, and whoever or whatever it was, it had been waiting for me all along. Story 10. The hospital had been abandoned for years, its windows shattered and walls overtaken by vines. Rumors surrounded the place, whispers of experiments gone wrong, of patients who never left. I had always been drawn to the eerie and the unknown, so when I finally stood before its rusted doors, I ignored the uneasy feeling in my stomach. The lock had long since been broken, leaving the entrance open like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow me whole. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the scent of mildew clinging to every surface. Dim light filtered through broken windows, casting long, jagged shadows along the hallway. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned, their rusted frames frozen in time. Faded patient files were scattered across the floor, their pages curling at the edges as if whispering secrets from the past. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Graffiti covered the peeling walls, some of it crude, some of it disturbing. Phrases like "still here" and "don't open the doors" were scrawled in uneven handwriting. The further I walked, the heavier the air seemed to become, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Room after room, I peeked inside, finding only decayed furniture and crumbling walls. Some beds still had restraints attached, their straps stiff with age. A few patient gowns lay in piles, as though their owners had simply vanished. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling that I wasn't alone gnawed at me. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar, its metal frame warped with age. A faded nameplate hung crookedly beside it, too worn to read. As I pushed it open, the hinges groaned in protest, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. The room was small, its walls lined with deep scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. A single bed sat against the far wall, its mattress sunken and covered in dust. The sheets, however, looked oddly undisturbed, smooth, except for a faint rise beneath them. My breath caught in my throat as I realized something was underneath. The rise and fall of the fabric was slow, rhythmic. Whatever was beneath it was breathing. My body refused to move as fear rooted me in place. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but none came. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the hospital and never return. But something about the stillness of the figure, the unnatural way the sheets clung to it, held me captive. I forced myself to step closer, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air grew colder, my breath forming faint clouds as I exhaled. I reached out with a trembling hand, fingers brushing the edge of the sheet. The moment I touched it, the breathing stopped. A silence heavier than before settled over the room. I stood frozen, waiting, listening. Then, in one sudden movement, the sheet collapsed inward, as if whatever had been underneath had vanished. My stomach twisted as I stumbled back, my eyes darting around the room. There was nowhere for anything to go, no vents, no openings, nothing. A sharp whisper cut through the silence, so close it could have been at my ear. "You shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice as I spun around, my eyes scanning the empty room. The whisper hadn't echoed. It had been real. Someone or something had spoken. I bolted from the room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching endlessly as my frantic footsteps echoed off the walls. The doors I had passed before were now slightly open, dark voids gaping at me. I could feel something watching, waiting. As I neared the exit, a crash sounded behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. I didn't dare look back. I threw myself at the doors, shoving them open and stumbling into the night air. The moment I was outside, the noises stopped. The hospital loomed behind me, silent once more. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I backed away, half expecting something to reach out and pull me back in. But nothing followed. Nothing chased me. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I started the engine, I risked one last glance at the hospital. A single window on the second floor, the room I had just fled from, was no longer dark. A figure stood there, its face obscured by shadow. The breath I had been holding finally released in a shudder. I threw the car into drive and sped away, the hospital shrinking in my rearview mirror. I told myself I would never return, that I had made a mistake going there. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at my ceiling, I swore I could hear it. The sound of something breathing. Story 11. The old school gym smelled of dust and forgotten memories. The wooden floor was scuffed and warped, the lines of the basketball court barely visible beneath years of neglect. Faint light seeped in through high, dirty windows, casting long shadows across the empty bleachers. I walked toward the center of the court, my footsteps echoing through the vast space. The silence felt thick, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Near the free throw line, something caught my eye, a torn basketball resting against the wall. It looked ancient, its leather cracked and peeling, the faded brand barely visible. I bent down, hesitating before reaching for it. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, a voice echoed through the gym, clear and unmistakable. "It's not your turn yet." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The gym was empty, there was no one else here. My heart pounded as I scanned the bleachers, the corners, every shadowed space, but I was alone. The ball hadn't moved, still resting where I had found it. A chill crept up my spine, the voice still ringing in my ears. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, but the uneasy feeling didn't fade. The air felt heavier, pressing down on my chest. The silence no longer felt empty but expectant, as if something unseen was watching. I stepped away from the ball, suddenly reluctant to be near it. I forced myself to turn, walking toward the exit with measured steps. The old gym doors stood partially open, the hallway beyond shrouded in dim light. I reached for the handle, but a sharp creak behind me made me freeze. Slowly I turned my head, dreading what I might see. The basketball was no longer by the wall. It had rolled to the center of the court, perfectly still despite the uneven floor. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I took a step back, unwilling to look away. The gym remained silent, but the air crackled with something unseen. My skin prickled as if someone was standing too close, breathing just behind my ear. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to move. My legs felt stiff, as if the very air was trying to hold me in place. I pushed through it, gripping the door and yanking it open, stepping into the hallway. The school was just as empty as before, the hall stretching into dimly lit silence. I exhaled shakily, but the relief was short-lived. A hollow thump echoed behind me, the unmistakable sound of the basketball bouncing once against the gym floor. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see if it had moved again. Instead, I quickened my pace, my footsteps uneven against the cracked tiles. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead. A flickering light buzzed overhead, the hum filling the otherwise silent corridor. My shadow stretched unnaturally long against the walls, distorting with every step. I didn't remember the school feeling this suffocating before. Reaching the exit, I pushed against the heavy doors, stepping into the crisp night air. The cool breeze was a welcome contrast to the stagnant air inside. I took a deep breath, but the unease lingered, clinging to my skin. I turned to look at the school one last time. The gym windows loomed above, dark and hollow. Just as I was about to leave, something shifted in the shadows beyond the glass. A faint outline, barely visible, watching. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to walk toward my car. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the darkness. As I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something best left alone. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice again, distant but clear. "It's not your turn yet." The words settled deep into my mind, refusing to fade. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me. Every shadow felt too deep, every silence too expectant. At night, I swore I heard the faint echo of a basketball bouncing outside my window. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild, but the feeling didn't fade. Something had shifted that night in the gym, something that had noticed me. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I returned to the school, pushing past the gnawing dread in my chest. The doors groaned as I stepped inside, the hallway stretching ahead in familiar silence. The gym was just as I had left it, the air thick with dust and age. My footsteps echoed as I approached the court, my breath shallow. The basketball was gone. I scanned the floor, the corners, the space where it had once been, but it had vanished. A strange mix of relief and unease settled over me. Maybe it had never been real in the first place. Just as I turned to leave, the lights overhead flickered violently. The air grew colder, thick with something unseen. A low, rhythmic sound broke the silence, the steady, unmistakable bounce of a basketball. My blood turned to ice as the sound echoed through the empty gym. It came from behind me, just a few feet away. Slowly, I turned my head, my breath caught in my throat. The ball was there again, resting in the exact same spot I had first found it. My pulse pounded as I took a shaky step back. The voice returned, closer than before, a whisper brushing against my ear. "It's your turn now." The gym lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps, my body frozen in place. The bouncing sound resumed, slow and deliberate, moving toward me. I turned and ran, my feet slamming against the wooden floor. The door felt miles away, my every step swallowed by the suffocating dark. Behind me, the bouncing continued, growing faster, closer. I reached the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. The silence was immediate, unnatural. My heart pounded as I turned back. The gym was still, the basketball gone once more. The air no longer felt thick, the heavy presence vanishing like a dissipating shadow. But I knew it wasn't over. Something had changed. I never went back to that gym. Even now, I sometimes hear it in the distance, a rhythmic bouncing in the quiet of the night. It's faint, almost easy to ignore. Almost. Story 12. I thought it was just an abandoned train yard, but when I found freshly lit candles and a strange smell in the air, I began to realize something far more sinister was at play. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows against the rusted freight cars, making the place feel alive in an unnatural way. The smell was thick, cloying, something between burnt herbs and decaying wood. My gut told me to leave, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. I stepped closer, my breath slow and measured as I scanned the area. The train yard had been abandoned for years, left to rust and crumble under the weight of time. The tracks were warped and twisted, barely visible beneath creeping weeds and debris. Yet despite its decay, the presence of the candle suggested someone had been here recently. My eyes landed on a small wooden crate near the tracks, where several more candles had melted into uneven pools of wax. Beside them, a bundle of dried flowers had been arranged in a careful pattern, their petals brittle and faded. Scattered around were fragments of paper, some torn, others folded neatly, as if part of some ritual. The sight made my skin crawl. The uneasy feeling in my stomach deepened as I knelt to examine one of the papers. It was covered in strange symbols, looping and sharp, unlike any language I had seen before. Some of the ink had bled through, the edges curling as if exposed to heat. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the train yard, snuffing out a few of the candles, leaving the air heavy with wax and smoke. I rose to my feet, scanning my surroundings again, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet everything had become. The usual sounds of the night, distant traffic, chirping insects had faded into silence. The only noise was the faint crackling of the remaining candle flames. It felt as though something or someone was watching. I took a cautious step back, my pulse quickening as my eyes darted between the darkened train cars. The longer I stood there, the stronger the strange scent became, almost suffocating. It wasn't just herbs and wood, it was something else, something foul. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. A metallic creak echoed through the yard, followed by the faintest shuffle of footsteps. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs. The sound had come from one of the train cars, its rusted door slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, with the wind pushing it open wider, I could see the dark void inside. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I forced myself forward, drawn by the need to understand what was happening here. I moved slowly, my breath shallow as I approached the car. The door groaned again, swaying slightly, as if inviting me in. I hesitated at the threshold, peering into the gloom. The interior was colder than the outside air, the temperature drop immediate and unnatural. The floor was littered with more melted candles and scorched bits of fabric. A heavy iron chain hung from the ceiling, swaying gently as if recently disturbed. Then I saw a large circular marking on the floor, carved into the rotting wood. The symbol was intricate, spanning nearly the entire space, its grooves deep and deliberate. The edges were blackened, as though burned into place. Dried wax filled some of the carvings, pooling in the gaps like hardened veins. My stomach twisted at the sight, my body screaming at me to turn around and run. Before I could react, another sound reached me, a low, guttural whisper, barely audible yet unmistakable. It came from deeper inside the train car, past the carved symbol, from the shadows beyond. My fingers clenched into fists as I tried to steady my breathing. The voice was neither male nor female, distorted and fragmented like a broken transmission. Then, all at once, the candles reignited, their flames burst into life with an unnatural intensity. The glow illuminated the far end of the car, revealing something slumped against the wall. At first I thought it was a bundle of cloth, but as the flames flickered, I saw the outline of limbs twisted and still. My breath hitched as I took a step back, my vision tunneling. The figure didn't move, didn't react to the light, but I could feel something shifting in the air. The whispering grew louder, curling around me like unseen fingers, pressing against my ears. The voice wasn't coming from the figure, it was coming from the symbol on the floor. Panic surged through me as I turned to flee, but my foot caught on something, sending me stumbling forward. My hands hit the floor, mere inches from the carved lines, and a sudden shock coursed through me, like static snapping against my skin. I scrambled back, my pulse hammering, refusing to look at whatever I had nearly touched. The whispering ceased abruptly, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. The train yard felt even darker than before, the air thick with something unexplainable. I forced myself to my feet, my body trembling as I backed away from the train car. The door, as if sensing my departure, began to creak shut on its own. As soon as I was outside, I ran. My legs ached, but I didn't stop until I was well past the rusting fences, back onto the cracked pavement of the nearby road. I turned once just to be sure I wasn't being followed. The train yard remained eerily still, the candles still burning in the distance. I didn't sleep that night. My mind replayed everything, the symbols, the whispering, the figures slumped in the darkness. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, an illusion of my own fear. But the feeling in my gut, the sensation of unseen eyes lingering long after I had left, told me otherwise. Days passed, and though I tried to push the memory aside, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Then, one evening, as I walked past the old train yard again, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The candles were still there, still burning, as if they had never gone out. The train yard wasn't abandoned. It had never been. Story 13. The amusement park had been abandoned for years, left to decay under the weight of time and neglect. Rusted rides stood like skeletons, their faded paint peeling under the sun. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and metal, an eerie stillness settling over everything. I had come out of curiosity, drawn to the rumors of strange happenings within the park's ruins. My footsteps crunched against the cracked pavement as I walked past shattered ticket booths and collapsed food stands. The silence was unnatural, the absence of birds or insects making the place feel frozen in time. Vines curled around the skeletal remains of a roller coaster, the tracks vanishing into the overgrown foliage. It felt as though I had stepped into a forgotten world, one where something unseen lingered just beyond my vision. As I wandered deeper, a soft melody drifted through the air, delicate and haunting. The sound was unmistakable, a music box, its tinny notes carrying through the emptiness. My breath caught in my throat as I turned in search of the source, my pulse quickening with each step. There was no reason for music to be playing in a place that had been abandoned for years. The sound led me toward the rusting Ferris wheel, its once bright carriages now hanging like ghostly remnants of the past. The wheel stood still, unmoving against the pale sky, its frame covered in patches of corrosion. The music grew louder as I approached, the notes twisting in the air like a forgotten lullaby. My hands trembled as I swept my flashlight over the base of the ride, expecting to find something, anything that could explain it. There was nothing there. The wind had picked up slightly, whispering through the gaps in the metal, but the music continued undisturbed. My skin prickled as I took a step closer, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The sound wasn't coming from a speaker or a forgotten toy, it was coming from the Ferris wheel itself. I reached out, pressing my palm against the rusted metal frame, half expecting it to vibrate with the sound. It was cold beneath my touch, unmoving, lifeless. Yet the melody continued, seeping into my bones with an unnatural clarity. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, an unease curling deep in my gut. A gust of wind rattled the empty carriages, making them sway slightly, their chains creaking with the motion. The music wavered for a moment, then resumed as if nothing had disturbed it. I took a step back, the weight of unseen eyes settling over me. The feeling of being watched was impossible to shake, thick and suffocating. I turned sharply, scanning my surroundings, my flashlight casting long, jagged shadows across the crumbling structures. There was no one else here, at least, no one I could see. The air had grown heavier, the temperature dropping despite the lingering warmth of the day. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, but something deeper held me in place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. One of the Ferris wheel's carriages swayed more than the others, as if something had just climbed inside. My throat tightened as I focused on it, my breath hitching. The music remained unchanged, an eerie, taunting presence in the quiet. I took a cautious step forward, my body tense with anticipation. The carriage was empty, its seat worn and torn by the elements, yet the sensation of something unseen remained. My fingers twitched at my side, my instincts warring with my curiosity. The music box tune repeated its cycle, a song I had never heard before but somehow felt familiar. Then the Ferris wheel groaned. It was a slow, shuddering sound, like metal waking from a long slumber. My pulse skyrocketed as I stepped back, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The wheel didn't move, but something about it had changed, something I couldn't explain. A sudden gust of wind sent a chill down my spine, carrying the scent of something old, something decayed. The music faltered, twisting into an off-key distortion before cutting off entirely. The silence that followed was worse, stretching into something unbearable. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if something had just noticed me for the first time. I turned on my heel, walking quickly back toward the entrance, my mind screaming at me to leave. The park felt different now, as though the weight of time had settled heavily upon it. The broken attractions loomed over me, casting jagged silhouettes against the dimming sky. Every shadow felt too deep, every empty space filled with unseen eyes. As I neared the exit, the music started again. It was faint, almost distant, yet unmistakable. My legs carried me faster, my breath coming in uneven gasps. The melody followed me, chasing me like an echo of something forgotten. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the door handle, my fingers slick with sweat. I threw myself inside, locking the doors before daring to look back. The Ferris wheel stood motionless in the distance, its silhouette barely visible through the overgrown trees. The music had stopped again, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing. My hands trembled as I started the engine, the weight of the amusement park pressing against my chest. I drove away without looking back, the road stretching endlessly before me. The further I got, the lighter the air felt, as if I was shedding something invisible that had clung to me. Yet, even as I reached the safety of home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought something back with me. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence in my room felt unnatural. The shadows stretched too far, the air too still. Then, just as sleep threatened to take me, I heard it. A soft, tinny melody drifting through the darkness, playing from somewhere just beyond my door. Story 14. The factory had been abandoned for years, its towering steel structure rusted and crumbling. I had always been drawn to places like this, places where time had stopped and decay had taken over. As I stepped through a broken doorway, the scent of oil and damp concrete filled my lungs. Dust clung to every surface, and old machinery stood frozen in place, covered in layers of grime. Shafts of light filtered through shattered windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaking pipe. I moved carefully, my footsteps echoing through the vast emptiness. Rows of rusted conveyor belts stretched out before me, their belts torn and sagging. In the distance, an old control panel stood against the wall, its buttons faded and cracked with age. As I explored deeper, I noticed a section of the wall that didn't match the rest. It was smoother, less worn, as if it had been altered long after the factory had shut down. My curiosity piqued. I pressed against it, feeling for any hidden latches or seams. After a moment of searching, my fingers found a small indentation near the floor. I pushed against it, and to my surprise, the panel shifted slightly. With a firm shove, the hidden door groaned open, revealing a narrow passage leading into darkness. A metallic scent filled the air as I stepped inside, my pulse quickening. The room was small and cramped, its walls lined with shelves. A single workbench stood in the center, cluttered with tools that looked far too clean compared to the decay outside. Hammers, wrenches, and saws were neatly arranged, their metal surfaces gleaming under the dim light. But what made my stomach turn was the deep crimson coating that covered them. Thick, dried, and unmistakable, it clung to the edges of the tools like a grotesque varnish. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, my mind racing through possibilities. This factory had been shut down for decades. There shouldn't have been anyone here. And yet, these tools looked as if they had been used recently. A faint sound echoed from somewhere beyond the room, a slow, deliberate creak. My skin prickled as I realized I was no longer certain I was alone. I turned off my flashlight and held my breath, straining to hear past the pounding of my own heartbeat. The noise came again, closer this time, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps. Panic surged through me as I backed away from the workbench, my body tense. Whoever was out there wasn't just another explorer like me. A shadow flickered against the far wall, tall and unmoving. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The air in the room had turned suffocating, thick with the scent of rust and something far worse. Slowly, I crouched behind the workbench, my hands gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped just outside the hidden door, the silence stretching unbearably. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. A slow, deliberate breath sounded from the doorway, so close I could almost feel it. My muscles locked as I tried to make myself as small as possible, willing the darkness to swallow me. The figure didn't move, just stood there, waiting. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence withdrew. The footsteps faded, retreating down the passageway. I forced myself to stay still, waiting until I was certain I was alone. When I finally dared to move, my limbs were stiff from crouching. I rose slowly, my breath shallow, and turned my flashlight back on. The workbench looked the same, the tools still gleaming under the dim light, their crimson coating unchanged. I needed to leave. Now, my body screamed for me to get out, but the fear still gripped me, keeping me frozen in place. I forced myself to turn toward the passage, my heartbeat hammering as I stepped toward the door. As I moved, something new caught my eye, something I had missed before. A single sheet of paper lay on the workbench, partially covered by a stained cloth. I hesitated, then reached out with a shaking hand to pull it free. The writing was smeared, but I could still make out a few words. "He watches." The ink had bled into the paper, the message frantic and uneven. My stomach twisted as I read it again, my mind racing with questions. A noise outside the hidden room made me jump, my hands clenching around the paper. The footsteps had returned, slower this time, more deliberate. I didn't wait to see who or what was there. Bolting for the passage, I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The walls seemed to close in around me as I stumbled into the main factory floor, my legs shaking beneath me. I ran, dodging rusted machinery and broken crates, my only focus on reaching the exit. Behind me, I heard something shift, a sound like metal scraping against concrete. I didn't look back. The doorway loomed ahead, its broken frame a beacon of escape. I lunged through it, nearly tripping as I burst into the open air. The cold night hit me like a wave, shocking me back into reality. I spun around, my chest heaving, expecting to see something emerging from the darkness. But the factory remained silent, its gaping entrance revealing nothing. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the broken windows. I backed away, my mind still reeling from what I had seen. The tools, the blood, the hidden room, it all felt like a nightmare. But the message on that paper, the whisper of footsteps in the dark, told me otherwise. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. Even as I put distance between me and that cursed place, the feeling of unseen eyes lingered. And in the silence of the night, I swore I heard footsteps following me. Story 15. And the entrance to the abandoned military base was half buried beneath layers of dirt and overgrown foliage. The chain-link fence that had once kept trespassers out sagged, rust eating through its links. A faded sign warned against unauthorized entry, but the warning had lost its power decades ago. I stepped through a gap in the fence, my boots crunching against gravel as I approached the main structure. The building loomed before me, its concrete walls cracked and weathered by time. The windows were shattered, leaving jagged edges like broken teeth, and the metal doors hung slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Rows of rusted filing cabinets stood against the walls, their drawers either missing or forced open long ago. Papers lay scattered across the floor, their edges curled and brittle, as if they had been waiting for someone to read them. I moved carefully, my flashlight cutting through the dimness. The deeper I went, the more the silence pressed against me, thick and unnatural. It was the kind of silence that felt intentional, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Down one of the long corridors, I found something strange. Symbols painted in deep red covered the walls in chaotic patterns. They twisted and spiraled, some resembling letters, others forming shapes that felt almost alive. I ran my fingers over one of the markings, feeling the uneven texture of dried paint. The symbols didn't match any language I knew, yet they seemed deliberate, as if whoever had made them had been following a pattern. The further I walked, the denser they became, covering the walls and ceiling like a spreading infection. At the end of the corridor, I found a heavy metal door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a small room stood untouched by time. A single desk sat in the center, surrounded by overturned chairs and stacks of old documents. The air was different here still, but charged with something I couldn't define. On the far wall, a large sheet of paper had been nailed in place. Names were scrawled in neat rows, each written with the same heavy hand. I stepped closer, scanning them, looking for something familiar. My stomach twisted when I found it my own name, written among strangers. I traced the letters with my fingertip, my breath slowing. The ink looked fresh, too dark to have been sitting there for decades. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone watching me, but I was alone. I searched the desk for any explanation. The drawers were filled with yellowed reports, but none of them made sense. They mentioned test subjects, failed experiments, and repeated references to something called Phase 4. There were no dates, no locations, just cryptic notes and initials. A scraping sound echoed behind me, and I turned sharply. The door I had entered through was swinging shut, its hinges groaning. I lunged forward, catching it before it could close completely. My pulse pounded as I forced it back open, stepping quickly into the hallway. The symbols on the walls seemed different now, shifting in the edges of my vision. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, as if the base itself wanted me gone. My flashlight flickered, and the darkness thickened, pressing in like a living thing. I retraced my steps, moving faster now. Every shadow felt deeper, every sound sharper. The corridors twisted in ways I didn't remember, leading me past rooms I had not seen before. My own breath sounded too loud in the stillness. Then, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, following me at a distance. I turned a corner, pressing my back against the wall, trying to listen. The footsteps stopped, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. I pushed forward, my heart hammering. The exit had to be close. I turned another corner and froze. The wall at the end of the hall was covered with more names, stretching from floor to ceiling. Some were crossed out, others underlined, and my own name had been circled. A sharp noise broke the silence, a whisper of movement too close. I spun around, but the hallway behind me was empty. The air was colder now, heavy with something unseen. The silence stretched, unnatural and waiting. I forced myself to move, walking quickly toward the exit. The further I went, the more the corridors seemed to shift, as if the base was rearranging itself around me. My flashlight dimmed again, the beam growing weaker with every step. When I finally reached the entrance, the sight of the open doorway sent a flood of relief through me. I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp open air, but something felt wrong. The landscape looked different. The trees stood taller, denser, the sky a shade darker than it should have been. I turned back to the building, and for the first time, I noticed something I had missed before. Above the entrance, faintly etched into the stone, were the same strange symbols from inside. They had always been there, unnoticed until now. As I stepped away, the silence of the base stretched behind me, waiting. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the list inside had changed. Story 16. The bus sat in the middle of an overgrown field, its rusted frame blending into the surrounding weeds. The windows were shattered, leaving jagged glass clinging to the frames like broken teeth. Its yellow paint had faded to a sickly brown, streaked with years of grime and neglect. Something about it felt wrong, but curiosity pulled me closer. Stepping through the open door, I was hit with the stench of mildew and rotting fabric. The seats were torn apart, stuffing spilling onto the floor like disemboweled corpses. Graffiti covered the walls, though most of it had faded to illegibility. The air inside was thick, still, as if it had been holding its breath for years. I moved down the aisle, my footsteps muffled by layers of dirt and leaves. A single backpack sat slumped against the last row of seats, too new to belong here. The sight of it sent a chill through me, a reminder that I wasn't the only one who had stepped inside that day. I turned slowly, my pulse quickening as the silence pressed in around me. A faint scuffling sound echoed from the front of the bus, near the driver's seat. I froze, listening, my breath caught in my throat. The wind outside had died down, leaving nothing to explain the noise. Swallowing hard, I took a hesitant step forward, my shoes crunching against broken glass. The sound came again, sharper this time, like something shifting against the floor. My mind raced with possibilities: an animal, another trespasser, or something worse. The idea of turning back clawed at me, but I forced myself to move forward. If someone was in here with me, I needed to know who or what they were. Reaching the front of the bus, I peered around the torn driver's seat. The space beneath the dash was dark, shrouded in shadows too deep for the dim light filtering through the broken windows. A sour smell lingered in the air, different from the mildew, something metallic, something raw. My stomach twisted as I noticed a dark smear trailing toward the door. A faint shuffle came from behind me, near the seats I had just passed. My breath hitched, and I turned sharply, my eyes scanning the empty rows. The backpack was still there, untouched, but the sense of being watched had grown unbearable. The air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing against my skin. I took a step back, my foot sliding slightly on something slick. My heart pounded as I looked down, my stomach turning at the sight of a fresh smear of blood leading toward the rear emergency exit. It was too much. I needed to leave. Spinning on my heel, I started toward the front, my pulse hammering in my ears. A sudden creak stopped me in my tracks. It came from behind, from one of the seats near the back. My breath caught, and I turned slowly, my hands clenched at my sides. The silence that followed was suffocating, stretching out for what felt like an eternity. Then, something shifted in the shadows. A figure rose from behind a seat, barely visible in the dim light. My body locked up as I registered its presence, tall, thin, its features obscured by darkness. It didn't move toward me, didn't speak. It only stood there, watching. The realization that it had been there the entire time made my skin crawl. The backpack wasn't theirs. That much was clear. They had been here before me, waiting, listening as I moved through the bus. My throat tightened as I took a step back, forcing my legs to move despite the terror gripping me. The figure remained still, its head tilting slightly as if studying me. I turned and bolted toward the door, the bus suddenly feeling too small, too enclosed. The second my foot hit the ground outside, I felt like I could breathe again. The wind had picked up, rustling the tall grass and whispering against the sides of the bus. I didn't dare look back, didn't want to see if the figure had followed. My car was parked a good distance away, hidden along a dirt road where I had wandered off trail. The thought of how far I had to go sent another jolt of fear through me. Forcing myself forward, I pushed through the weeds, my ears straining for any sound of movement behind me. Halfway to the car, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The bus sat in the field, dark and unmoving, its broken windows gaping like empty eye sockets. No one stood in the doorway. No one emerged from the tall grass. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left. Reaching my car, I yanked the door open and slid inside, locking it with trembling fingers. My breaths came in short gasps as I stared at the road ahead, willing myself to drive. The image of that figure lingering in the shadows refused to leave my mind. It had been waiting for something or someone. I started the engine, the sound breaking the eerie silence around me. As I pulled away, I forced myself not to look back again. The bus would still be there, rotting in that field, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to stumble upon it. And whoever had been inside would still be watching. Story 17. The crumbling, abandoned house on the outskirts of town felt like it had been forgotten for years. Its windows were shattered, the wooden frame sagging from decades of neglect. Vines had claimed the exterior, twisting through broken panels and curling around the rusted porch railing. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, thick with the weight of time. I wasn't sure what had drawn me there that day, only that I had been walking and somehow ended up at its front steps. The town had plenty of ghost stories about the place, disappearances, strange noises, lights flickering in the windows at night. I had always dismissed them as superstition, the usual tales whispered about any abandoned home. But standing there, I felt an undeniable pull, a quiet insistence that I should go inside. The door hung slightly open, swaying in the breeze as if inviting me in. I hesitated before stepping forward, the floor groaning beneath my weight. Dust and debris covered the ground, broken furniture piled in corners like forgotten memories. The silence was heavy, wrapping around me in an almost suffocating embrace. Moving through the decayed hallways, I noticed the remnants of a life left behind. A child's shoe near the staircase, an overturned chair in the dining room, faded wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling of unease became. It was as if something was watching, hidden just beyond my sight. I found the photos in a small room at the end of the hall, stacked neatly in a wooden box. The dust on the lid suggested it hadn't been touched in years, but the photos inside told a different story. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, each one showing a different angle of the house. In the living room, at the base of the stairs, near the front door. Then I saw myself. The first image was of me standing in the very room where I now stood, my expression blank, my posture rigid. The second showed me at the window, gazing outside as if looking for something. My breath hitched as I shuffled through them, each photo revealing a different moment, a different place within the house. But I had never been here before. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I reached the last picture. It was taken from behind me, capturing the back of my head as I stood in the doorway. The angle suggested the photographer had been standing right where I was now. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, my grip tightening on the stack of photos. Someone had been here. The creak of a floorboard sent ice through my veins. The sound came from the hallway, just beyond the doorframe. I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor stretching into darkness, dust swirling in the faint light. I swallowed hard, shoving the photos back into the box. The weight of the house pressed against me, thick and stifling, the air suddenly colder. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run before something unseen decided I had overstayed my welcome. As I turned to go, something caught my eye, one last photograph lying on the floor, half hidden beneath debris. My fingers hesitated before picking it up, my pulse hammering as I flipped it over. The image was different from the others. It showed me standing outside the house, staring up at the second floor window. And in that window, a shadowed figure stood watching me. A sharp knock echoed through the house, making me jump. It came from somewhere upstairs, deep within the rotting walls. My breath came shallow, the weight of the photo still in my hand. I didn't want to know who or what had taken these pictures. I only knew I had to get out. I moved quickly, my footsteps light, as I retraced my way through the hall. The silence had changed, no longer just emptiness, but something expectant, something waiting. The front door loomed ahead, slightly ajar, the light outside promising escape. But just as I reached for it, a whisper brushed against my ear. "Don't go." The words were soft, almost pleading, but they sent a jolt of terror through me. I spun around, but the house remained empty still. My hand found the doorknob, slick with sweat as I yanked it open. Cold air rushed past me as I stumbled onto the porch, my chest heaving with shallow breaths. I didn't stop running until I was back on the main road, the house shrinking behind me. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen, what I had heard. The photos, the figure in the window, the whisper that had seemed so close. I couldn't explain any of it, but I knew one thing: I had never been in that house before today. So why had there been pictures of me inside? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photographs, the shadow in the window. I told myself it was a trick, a prank, someone trying to scare me. But deep down I knew there was no logical explanation. The photos had been waiting for me. Morning brought little relief. I debated throwing the box away, burning it, anything to erase the unease that clung to me. But when I went to retrieve it, my blood ran cold. The box was gone. I searched my room, my house, convinced I had misplaced it in my panic. But no matter where I looked, it was nowhere to be found. The realization sank in like ice. I hadn't brought it home. I had dropped it in my rush to escape, which meant someone else had taken it. As the day wore on, I tried to shake the lingering dread, to convince myself it was over. But as I stepped outside, my breath caught in my throat. There, resting on my porch, was a single photograph. With trembling hands, I picked it up, flipping it over. The image sent my heart into a frenzy. It was me, lying in bed, asleep. And in the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the shadows, was a figure standing over me. Story 18. The warehouse stood at the edge of town, long abandoned and forgotten. I had passed by it countless times, always drawn to its looming presence. That night, curiosity got the best of me, and I slipped through a rusted side door. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of old metal and oil clinging to the walls. My footsteps echoed in the vast space as I moved deeper inside. Rows of machines sat motionless, their hulking forms covered in cobwebs. The silence was unsettling, a heavy stillness pressing down on me. I swept my flashlight over the rusted conveyor belts and empty workstations, trying to imagine what the place had once been like. A sudden click echoed through the warehouse, followed by a low hum. The overhead lights flickered on for a split second, bathing the space in harsh white light. At that moment, the machines roared to life, their gears grinding as conveyor belts lurched forward. My breath caught in my throat as the entire room seemed to wake up around me. Then, just as quickly as it started, everything went dark again. The machines stopped, the lights blinked out, and silence swallowed the space once more. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned toward the exit. The door was locked. I gripped the handle, twisting it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. Panic crept in as I yanked harder, my fingers slick with sweat. I hadn't heard a lock engage, yet I was trapped, sealed inside the massive warehouse. I forced myself to stay calm and turned back toward the machines. They loomed in the darkness, their outlines barely visible against the dim glow of my flashlight. My gut told me I wasn't alone, though I saw nothing moving. The stillness felt heavier now, thick with an unspoken presence. I took cautious steps forward, scanning the rows of machinery for another exit. A set of stairs led up to an observation room overlooking the floor. If I could get up there, maybe I could find a way out. My footsteps felt too loud as I ascended, each creak of the metal stairs setting my nerves on edge. The glass windows of the observation room were cracked and fogged with grime. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, relieved to find an old control panel. My hands hovered over the buttons, unsure if I should touch anything. If the power had flickered on once, maybe I could force it back. A sudden clang echoed from below, making me jump. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the factory floor. One of the machines had moved. A metal arm, once lifeless, now extended outward, its clawed end twitching. My stomach clenched as another machine sputtered to life, gears grinding in the darkness. I backed away from the window, gripping the edge of the control panel. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen force. Another machine whirred, then another, each coming to life one by one. The sounds built into a mechanical symphony, the warehouse filling with the ghostly echoes of a long-dead industry. I needed to get out. I grabbed a rusted chair and swung it at the window, the glass shattering with a sharp crack. The opening wasn't big enough to fit through, but the fresh air that rushed in steadied my racing heart. I had to move fast before the machines did something worse. A loud screech tore through the air, making me wince. I turned just in time to see one of the conveyor belts moving, something large rolling down its surface. It was a mannequin, its plastic limbs jerking as if trying to escape. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. The mannequin reached the end of the belt and fell onto the floor with a hollow thud. More movement followed as another conveyor belt jolted forward, another mannequin appearing from the shadows. Their blank faces stared up at the ceiling, mouths slightly open as if frozen mid-scream. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. The moment my feet hit the factory floor, the machines surged louder, their parts grinding and whirring in chaotic rhythm. The mannequins twitched, their arms jerking unnaturally. My flashlight flickered, plunging everything into brief darkness. When the light returned, the mannequins had moved. They stood upright now, their glassy eyes trained on me. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. I took a step back, but they shifted with me, their stiff limbs creaking as they adjusted their stance. A sharp metallic clang rang out from behind me. I whipped around just as a massive press lurched downward, crushing an unseen object beneath it. The machines weren't just running, they were operating, as if following some unseen command. I couldn't stay here any longer. I ran to the door, throwing my weight against it with everything I had. The wood groaned but didn't give. A low mechanical hiss filled the air, followed by the slow whine of gears turning. I glanced over my shoulder, my stomach twisting. The mannequins were moving toward me. My hands fumbled with the rusted lock, my fingers slick with sweat. A mannequin's arm twitched just inches away, its fingers stretching toward my shoulder. With one final desperate pull, the lock gave way, and the door swung open. I stumbled outside, gasping as the cold night air hit me. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound stopped. I turned to look back, my breath still ragged. The warehouse stood silent, dark, and empty once more. The mannequins were gone, the machines lifeless. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I backed away slowly, unwilling to take my eyes off the building. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. My body trembled, the adrenaline still rushing through my veins. Whatever had happened inside that warehouse, I knew one thing for certain. I was never supposed to leave. Story 19. The shopping center had been abandoned for years, its once bright storefronts now faded and crumbling. I had passed by it dozens of times before, always curious about what remained inside. That evening, with nothing else to do, I decided to explore. The doors were unlocked, the glass long since shattered, making entry easy. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, remnants of years without maintenance. Rows of empty stores lined the main hallway, their signs barely legible through layers of grime. A few overturned benches and rusted trash cans sat untouched, as if waiting for a crowd that would never return. My footsteps echoed loudly, the only sound in the vast emptiness. I moved deeper, passing the food court where a table sat askew, covered in dirt. A few scattered trays remained, their plastic edges warped with age. The silence was almost too perfect, as if the place was holding its breath. I told myself it was just my imagination, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I wandered past a clothing store, its mannequins still standing in cracked display windows. Their blank faces were covered in dust, their hands positioned mid-gesture, as if frozen in time. A faint draft moved through the corridor, stirring the loose papers and debris that littered the floor. I shivered, suddenly uneasy despite the stillness. After a while, I came across an unmarked door near the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed it open, stepping inside. The air was colder here, untouched by whatever faint light still managed to seep through the mall's broken windows. The room was small, filled with old filing cabinets and dusty monitors stacked against the walls. A large desk sat in the center, covered in scattered papers and a single, open ledger. I moved closer, brushing away the dust to read what was written inside. My stomach clenched when I saw the list of dates and times, each one meticulously recorded. I flipped through the pages, my hands growing clammy as I read entry after entry. Every visit had been documented, right down to the exact minute of arrival. My breath caught in my throat when I reached the last entry, written in smudged ink. It was today's date, and next to it, my arrival time was recorded perfectly. A chill ran down my spine as I turned toward the dusty monitors, my fingers hesitating over the power button. Most of the screens were dark, but one flickered weakly, showing a grainy black and white feed of the very hallway I had just walked through. I stared at the screen, searching for movement, but the corridor remained empty. I reached for one of the filing cabinets, pulling open the top drawer. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, all filled with similar records of visitors. Some of the dates stretched back decades, yet the handwriting remained eerily consistent, as if written by the same person. The names were unfamiliar, but each one had a matching timestamp, just like mine. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears as I flipped further back. A name stood out among the others, underlined in heavy strokes. Next to it, instead of an exit time, there was only a single word missing. My hands trembled as I scanned the pages, realizing there were dozens more marked the same way. The sound of something shifting outside made me freeze. It was faint, but in the absolute silence of the mall, it might as well have been a gunshot. I turned off the monitor, my breath shallow as I stepped away from the desk. The air in the room felt heavier now, pressing against my chest. I forced myself to move toward the door, peeking out into the hallway. The mall was still empty, but something about it felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, stretching unnaturally along the tiled floor. I gripped the edge of the door frame, trying to steady my nerves. As I stepped back into the corridor, I became painfully aware of how loud my breathing was. I moved quickly, retracing my steps toward the exit. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to leave whatever I had found behind. But the moment I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The papers I had seen scattered across the floor earlier were gone. The dust, once thick and undisturbed, was now smeared with fresh footprints. They weren't mine. My stomach twisted as I realized they led toward the security office, the room I had just left. I took a step back, my heart hammering as a soft noise echoed through the air. It was faint, almost like breathing, coming from somewhere nearby. I turned my flashlight toward the sound, the beam shaking as I struggled to keep my grip steady. The hallway was empty, but the noise hadn't stopped. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just needed to get out, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had been in that office. The entrance was close now, the broken doors just ahead. I burst through them, stumbling onto the pavement outside. The cool night air hit me like a wave, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. My hands fumbled for my keys, shaking too hard to get them into the ignition at first. When the engine finally roared to life, I peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. As I sped down the empty road, my mind raced through what I had seen. The records, the missing names, the fresh footprints that hadn't been mine. Something had been inside that mall, something that had been keeping track of every visitor for decades. And if I had stayed a moment longer, I might have ended up as just another name on that list. Even after I got home, the unease didn't fade. I locked my doors, pulled the curtains shut, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it finally did, I dreamed of empty hallways and flickering monitors. Somewhere in that dark, decaying mall, I knew my name was now recorded in that book. The only question that remained was whether my exit time had been written down as well. Story 20. The circus had been shut down for over a decade, yet the massive tent still stood, tattered and sagging. Faded banners flapped weakly in the evening breeze, their colors drained by years of neglect. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, drawn to the eerie silence where laughter once echoed. Stepping inside, I inhaled the stale air, a mixture of damp fabric and something faintly metallic. The ground beneath my feet was soft with dirt and fallen leaves, littered with scraps of old posters and broken props. Wooden stands still circled the center ring, their paint chipped and peeling. A single trapeze hung motionless from the rafters, swaying slightly as if disturbed by an unseen force. The silence was heavy, pressing against my ears, as if the tent itself was holding its breath. I moved further inside, my flashlight casting long shadows across the empty space. A row of forgotten costumes lay in a heap against the far wall, their once bright fabrics dulled with dust. Some had holes, others were missing pieces, as if they had been abandoned mid-performance. One in particular caught my eye, a clown suit, ragged and torn, draped across a rusted trunk. The suit looked like it had been through hell, its once vibrant colors faded into a patchwork of grime. The oversized ruffles around the collar were stiff, the fabric beneath them stiffened with something dark. As I stepped closer, my stomach twisted. The stains weren't old. They were fresh, smeared across the fabric in deep crimson streaks. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I crouched to inspect it. The blood was still damp, soaking into the material as if whatever had happened had been recent. My fingers hesitated just above the fabric, an overwhelming sense of wrongness settling in my gut. Somewhere in the distance, the faint creak of shifting fabric echoed through the tent. I whipped around, my flashlight flickering as I scanned the shadows. The tent was still, but something felt different, like I was no longer alone. The feeling of being watched prickled along my skin, setting every nerve on edge. My breath came slower now, my body urging me to leave, yet my curiosity held me rooted in place. I turned back to the trunk, my pulse hammering in my ears. The lid was slightly open, revealing a glimpse of something inside. I hesitated before lifting it, the hinges groaning in protest. The first thing I saw was another costume, crumpled and stained, its white gloves soaked in the same deep red. A sickening realization settled over me. This wasn't just an old storage trunk. It was a hiding place, and whatever had been shoved inside had left behind more than just fabric. A foul, coppery scent rose from within, and I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. A sudden rustling from the other side of the tent made me freeze. It wasn't the wind this time. Something moved between the wooden stands, shifting just out of reach of my light. I stood slowly, my heart hammering, every muscle in my body screaming for me to run. I forced myself to step backward, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was the kind of silence that came when something was waiting, watching. My foot brushed against something soft, and I dared to glance down. A red nose, round and rubbery, lay in the dirt at my feet. It hadn't been there before. My blood turned to ice as I realized what that meant. Someone or something had placed it there. A breathy chuckle echoed through the tent, low and distorted. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, sending a jolt of pure terror through me. My flashlight flickered, and for the briefest moment I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the light, dressed in tattered rags, its face obscured by shadows. The laughter grew louder, closer, wrapping around me like a noose. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted, sprinting toward the entrance, my feet pounding against the dirt. The tent flaps loomed ahead, swaying slightly, just within reach. As I pushed through, something grazed my shoulder fingers, cold and clammy, barely missing their grip. I tumbled forward, crashing onto the damp grass outside. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to my feet, spinning around to face the tent. The entrance hung open, the interior swallowed in darkness. The laughter had stopped. The night was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had been in there with me. Something had wanted me to find that costume. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I wiped the sweat from my forehead. The circus tent loomed in the moonlight, its empty stands and decayed remnants hiding whatever secrets still lingered inside. I should have left then, walked away, and never looked back. But as I turned, my flashlight caught something in the grass just a few feet away. Another piece of fabric, torn from the clown's suit, stained in fresh blood. I stared at it, my mind racing, my body refusing to move. Then, slowly, the tent flaps shifted again, just the slightest movement, as if something inside was waiting for me to return. Story 21. The entrance to the old coal mine loomed before me, a gaping wound in the earth. Rusted tracks led into the darkness, disappearing beneath layers of dust and debris. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, the weight of history pressing down on everything. I stepped forward cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the inky blackness. The wooden support beams groaned softly, the sound settling uneasily in my chest. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily, the rhythmic tapping the only noise in the stillness. Deeper inside, the temperature dropped, the walls closing in with every step. My breath clouded in front of me as I scanned the tunnel, taking in the jagged stone and crumbling beams. Just as I was about to turn back, something caught my eye, a set of carvings etched into the rock. I moved closer, running my fingers over the rough grooves. The symbols were crude, hurried, as if carved by an unsteady hand. They stretched along the wall in uneven rows, some deeper than others, as though the person had pressed harder in desperation. A shiver ran down my spine as I traced the markings. They weren't just random scratches, they formed shapes, patterns, even crude letters. Whoever had made them had been trying to say something, to leave behind a message. The deeper I looked, the more unsettling they became. Some of the carvings resembled tally marks, hastily etched in clusters. Others looked like outstretched hands, fingers clawing at the stone, frozen in time. The thought unsettled me, but I couldn't pull away. I followed the carvings further down the tunnel, my flashlight flickering slightly. The air felt heavier now, pressing in against my skin like unseen hands. I stopped abruptly when I saw the last marking. It was different from the others, carved with precision rather than desperation. A single word stood out among the scattered symbols: help. A chill crawled up my spine, my breath hitching in my throat. The letters were jagged, uneven, as if the person carving them had been trembling. The realization hit me like a punch. Whoever made these was trapped here. The silence in the tunnel felt unbearable now, stretching too long between each drop of water. I shone my flashlight along the walls, searching for any other clues. My pulse hammered as my beam landed on something new, scratches leading down the tunnel, as if someone had been dragged. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. The further I followed the marks, the deeper the mind seemed to stretch. The darkness felt thicker now, my flashlight barely cutting through it. A cold draft snaked through the tunnel, carrying a faint, metallic scent. I hesitated, my body screaming at me to turn back. But something about those carvings, about that single word, made it impossible to leave. Then I heard it. A soft sound, almost imperceptible, echoing from somewhere ahead. It wasn't the drip of water or the groan of old beams. It was something else entirely, something human. I froze, my grip tightening on the flashlight. The sound came again, a low whisper barely above a breath. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, but the words were distorted, stretched by the tunnel walls. Summoning my courage, I took another step forward. The air grew colder, the dampness seeping into my bones. The marks on the walls became more frantic, deeper, as if the person had fought against the stone itself. Then my flashlight flickered, the darkness surging forward like a living thing. I smacked it against my palm, my pulse racing. When the beam steadied, I wished it hadn't. Ahead of me, at the very end of the tunnel, was an old wooden door. It was barely holding together, its surface splintered and warped. Deep gouges ran across the wood, as if someone had clawed at it from the other side. I swallowed hard, staring at the scratches. They matched the carvings in the stone, the same desperate etchings of someone who had been trapped. My stomach twisted as I realized how deep they were, how much force had been used. I reached for the handle, hesitating only for a moment. The metal was ice cold beneath my fingers, sending a jolt through my arm. I twisted it slowly, the hinges groaning in protest as the door creaked open. The room beyond was small, no more than a hollowed-out space in the rock. My flashlight swept across the floor, revealing old, tattered clothing and rusted tools. And in the corner, almost hidden by the shadows, were bones. A chill settled in my chest as I stepped closer. The remains were old, the bones dry and brittle, but the way they were positioned sent a shiver through me. Whoever this was had died reaching for the door. My breath hitched as I noticed something clutched in the skeletal fingers, a small, rusted knife. The blade was worn down, its edge dulled by time, but the purpose was clear. They had been trying to carve their way out. I stepped back, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. The air felt suffocating now, pressing in from all sides. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I swore I saw movement in the shadows. I turned on my heel and bolted, my footsteps slamming against the tunnel floor. The darkness clawed at my back, the whispering growing louder, more urgent. It wasn't just one voice now, it was many, overlapping, desperate. The carvings on the walls blurred past me as I ran, their meanings lost in my panic. The air grew warmer the closer I got to the entrance, the weight of the mine loosening its grip. I didn't stop until I burst out into the open air, gasping for breath. The night was still, the stars indifferent to what I had just witnessed. I turned back to the mine, my body trembling. The entrance stood silent and empty, the darkness inside undisturbed. But just as I turned to leave, a sound drifted from within. It was faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but I heard it. The slow, steady scrape of something carving into stone. Story 22. The warehouse had been abandoned for decades, its exterior covered in peeling paint and rusted metal. I had always been drawn to places like this, their emptiness holding stories waiting to be captured through my lens. The air was thick with dust, the scent of mildew and old wood seeping into every corner. My footsteps echoed softly as I moved through the cavernous space, my camera held tight in my hands. Broken windows allowed streaks of light to cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of forgotten crates and machinery. Some were stacked haphazardly, their wooden frames splintered with age. A few metal shelves leaned dangerously, threatening to collapse under their own weight. The place felt undisturbed, yet there was an odd sense of presence lingering in the air. I snapped a few shots of the decay, focusing on the intricate textures of rust and grime. The silence was nearly suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. My eyes drifted to a row of locked crates near the back wall, their lids secured with thick, corroded chains. Something about them stood out. They were cleaner, less covered in dust. Curiosity pulled me forward, my fingers tracing the cold metal links wrapped tightly around one of the crates. The lock was old, rusted but sturdy, as if someone had wanted whatever was inside to stay hidden. Nearby, I spotted a rusted crowbar half buried beneath a pile of debris. I hesitated for only a moment before prying the crate open. The wood groaned under the pressure before finally splintering apart. A wave of stale air rushed out, carrying a scent that made my stomach twist. Inside, something was wrapped in heavy, discolored fabric, the edges frayed with age. My pulse quickened as I reached in, my hands trembling as I pulled at the cloth. As soon as the fabric peeled away, I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. Beneath the layers was the unmistakable sight of human remains, brittle and decayed with time. The skull was partially exposed, its surface stained and cracked, hollow eye sockets staring into nothing. Shreds of clothing clung to the bones, barely holding their form. I stumbled back, my mind racing, my breath uneven. The scent of decay clung to my nostrils, sickly and sour. My camera slipped from my grasp, landing with a dull thud against the concrete floor. The crate had been locked for a reason, and I had just unearthed something that was never meant to be found. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The remains were old, but not ancient. The fabric more recent than I would have expected. Someone had placed them here deliberately, hidden them away where no one would look. The thought sent a chill down my spine, my body frozen in place. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a soft scuffling sound, like footsteps dragging against the floor. My breath hitched as I turned, scanning the shadows between the towering crates. The warehouse had been empty when I entered, I was sure of it. But now, the air felt charged, as if something had shifted. I took a slow step back, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable, my skin prickling with an unseen presence. Then, another noise of faint, wheezing breath, coming from somewhere just beyond my line of sight. My stomach twisted as the realization hit me. Someone else was here. I reached for my camera, my fingers barely closing around it before I heard another sound. A scraping, deliberate and slow, like something being dragged across the floor. My body tensed, my eyes darting toward the rows of crates ahead. The dim light barely reached past the broken windows, casting deep shadows that seemed to move on their own. I forced myself to stay calm, to focus on my exit. The main door was too far, but there was a side entrance I had passed earlier. I started moving, each step careful, my breaths shallow. The scent of decay clung to me, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. A whisper. Faint, almost too quiet to hear. It wasn't words, but a sound low and rasping, coming from the darkness beyond the crates. My body stiffened, the air around me suddenly too thick, too heavy. It was as if the very walls of the warehouse were closing in. Then movement. A shadow shifting, impossibly tall, slipping between the gaps in the crates. I didn't wait to see more. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, propelling me toward the exit. The moment I started running, the whisper turned into something else, a guttural, rasping breath, growing louder with every step. I reached the door and shoved it open, the metal groaning as I stumbled into the open air. The night was cold, the wind sharp against my skin. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I forced myself to look back, to make sure I wasn't being followed. The warehouse stood in silence, its gaping doorway revealing nothing but darkness inside. The sound was gone, the presence vanished, as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I climbed into my car, my breaths ragged as I gripped the wheel. The memory of the remains, the way they'd been wrapped so carefully, refused to leave my mind. Someone had hidden them there, someone who had gone to great lengths to make sure they were never found. And whatever was in that warehouse with me, it didn't want me to leave. I drove away, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, the image of the hollow eye sockets burned into my vision. I told myself I would never go back, that I would forget about the warehouse, about what I had seen. But deep down, I knew that was impossible. Because some things, once uncovered, refused to stay buried. Story 23. The old church sat on the edge of town, its once grand structure now weathered by time and neglect. The stained glass windows were cracked, their colors dulled by years of dirt and grime. Vines crawled up the stone walls, creeping into the gaps where bricks had crumbled away. Despite its decay, something about the place still felt imposing, as if it had not yet surrendered to time. I stepped through the broken doors, the hinges groaning under the weight of movement they had long forgotten. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by my presence, and the scent of damp wood filled my lungs. The pews were lined up in neat rows, though many were broken or missing entirely. A thick layer of dust coated everything, but there were signs that not all of it had been untouched. At the front of the church, the altar stood beneath an arched alcove, its surface covered in debris. But what caught my attention were the candles' small, white pillars placed in a perfect circle around the altar. Their wax had dripped down in uneven streams, pooling onto the aged stone. Some were still standing upright, as if they had been lit not long ago. A chill crept up my spine as I scanned the rest of the space, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. Someone had been here recently, despite the years of abandonment. My gaze fell on the nearest pew where something dark and jagged was scrawled across the wood. The edges were blackened, as if it had been burned into the surface. The message was barely legible, the letters uneven and rough, but I could make out a few words. "Dio not wake him." The sentence sent an uneasy tremor through my chest, the implications settling in like a heavy weight. I ran my fingers over the scorched marks, feeling the rough indentations beneath my touch. Whatever had been used to burn these words into the wood had done so with force. I turned back toward the altar, my breath coming slower now, more deliberate. The candles weren't the only thing left behind, small fragments of charred paper lay scattered on the stone. I picked one up carefully, the edges crumbling as I turned it over in my hands. The ink was smudged, but I could make out faint lines of text, prayers twisted into something darker. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the broken windows, snuffing out what little light my flashlight provided. The temperature dropped instantly, a biting cold settling over my skin. I fumbled to turn the flashlight back on, my fingers clumsy with unease. The beam flickered before steadying, casting long, sharp shadows across the ruined church. A creak echoed from somewhere deeper within, a slow and deliberate sound that sent every nerve in my body on edge. I swung the light toward the far end of the church, where a doorway led to what had once been the pastor's chambers. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness waiting just beyond. I wasn't alone. I forced myself forward, each step careful, calculated. The wooden floor groaned beneath my weight, the sound amplifying in the hollow emptiness. As I neared the doorway, a faint whisper drifted through the air, too soft to make out the words. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, my pulse quickening with each second that passed. The room beyond was small, its furniture overturned and covered in dust. A bookshelf stood against the far wall, its shelves emptied, save for a single leather-bound book. I reached for it hesitantly, the cover worn and cracked beneath my fingers. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, passages scratched out and rewritten over and over again. One phrase repeated more than any other, growing more frantic with each entry. "He never sleeps." My breath hitched as I turned the pages, the ink growing darker as if pressed with increasing desperation. The final entry was different, the words bold and uneven, smeared by what looked like ash. They brought him back. We were too late. A loud crash from the main hall made me jump, the book slipping from my grasp. My flashlight wavered as I turned sharply, my stomach knotting with dread. The sound had come from the altar, the place where the candles had been left burning. I stepped back into the main room, my footsteps careful, my pulse hammering. The candles were no longer in place. They had been scattered, some rolling onto the floor, their wax still warm. The air was heavier now, thick with something unseen, something waiting. I swallowed hard, my breath shallow as I stepped toward the altar once more. The temperature had dropped further, my breath now visible in the dim light. Then I heard it. A slow, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, but deeper, heavier. It came from beneath the altar, from somewhere below the stone foundation. I felt the vibration through my feet, a presence stirring beneath the earth. The burned message on the pew flashed in my mind, its warning now seared into my thoughts. The air shifted, a sensation of movement in the darkness, though I saw nothing. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I took a step back, my legs stiff with fear. The breathing continued steady and unfaltering, as if whatever lay beneath had just become aware of my presence. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty church, my breath coming in panicked gasps. The door loomed ahead, its broken frame a gateway to the outside world. Just as I reached it, I felt something shift behind me, a presence rising from the depths of the church. The air vibrated with something unseen, something ancient. I didn't stop until I was outside, my chest burning as I sucked in the cold night air. The church stood silent once more, its broken windows staring out like empty eyes. The music of the wind howled through its walls, but beneath it, I could still hear the faint, rhythmic breathing. I backed away, my hands shaking, my mind racing with the realization that whatever had been buried there was no longer resting. As I made my way back to my car, I forced myself not to look back. not to acknowledge the weight of the presence lingering in that place. But as I reached my vehicle, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A single, half-burnt candle sat on the hood, its wick still smoking. The scent of melted wax clung to the air, a silent message that I had been seen, that I had been warned. I drove away, the headlights carving through the night, my hands unsteady on the wheel. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark, but no matter how far I went, the feeling remained. In the silence, in the stillness of the world around me, I could still hear it. A slow, steady breath, never ceasing, never stopping. Story 24. The prison had stood on the outskirts of town for as long as I could remember, a decaying relic of a darker time. Most people avoided it, whispering about the things that had happened behind its towering stone walls. I had always been curious, drawn to the places others feared, so I decided to explore it before it was completely swallowed by time. The entrance was a gaping maw, its heavy metal doors rusted and hanging ajar. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew, a reminder that no life had moved through this place in years. Rows of cells stretched into the darkness, their iron bars corroded and crumbling. Some doors had been left open, their hinges rusted into permanent submission, while others remained tightly shut, as if still guarding the ghosts of their past occupants. The silence pressed down on me, so heavy that even my own breath felt intrusive. I moved cautiously, the floor beneath me cracked and littered with debris. Faint carvings marred the walls, names and dates scratched in desperation by the long-forgotten prisoners. I traced my fingers over the markings, wondering who they had been, what crimes had condemned them to this place. A faint breeze stirred the dust, sending a shiver down my spine. There were no windows here, no openings for the wind to seep through. My pulse quickened as I glanced over my shoulder, the emptiness stretching behind me untouched. I was alone, or at least I was supposed to be. I pressed on, my flashlight flickering as I entered a larger room. The remnants of an old guard station stood in the corner, its desk covered in brittle papers and rusted keys. A single chair lay overturned, as if someone had left in a hurry, though that should have been impossible. The sound of metal creaking made me freeze, my breath caught in my throat. It came from the corridor behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my grip, just in time to see one of the cell doors shifting open. The noise sent a chill through me, a long, drawn-out groan of rusted hinges. I forced myself to step closer, my heart hammering. The cell had been sealed when I passed it moments ago, its bars shut tight, yet now it stood open, an invitation into the dark beyond. My pulse pounded in my ears as I peered inside. The cell was empty, just a bare cot and a rusted chain bolted to the wall. Dust coated the floor, undisturbed, as if no one had moved in here for decades. Yet the door had opened, and I had no explanation for it. I stepped back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But something about the cell drew me in, an invisible pull that I couldn't shake. I took another cautious step, scanning every shadow, every corner, for anything that made sense of what I had just seen. A sudden clang echoed from deeper in the prison, a sharp, jarring sound that shattered the silence. My stomach twisted as I whipped around, my flashlight cutting through the dark. It had come from the far end of the hall, where more cells lay in waiting. I hesitated, every nerve in my body telling me to turn and run. But I had come this far, and a stubborn curiosity burned beneath my fear. I moved forward, my footsteps slow and deliberate, my light casting eerie shapes along the walls. Another sound, softer this time, like the scrape of fabric against stone. My breath came in short bursts as I reached the final row of cells. One door hung open, its interior lost in shadow. I raised my flashlight, my hand shaking as the beam revealed what lay inside. Deep scratches covered the walls, long gouges in the stone as if something had tried to claw its way out. A tattered mattress lay in the corner, its fabric shredded, and beneath it, barely visible in the dim light, a message had been carved into the floor. Not alone. Alone. My throat tightened as I read the words, each letter jagged and desperate. The air around me felt thick, charged with something unseen. The silence was no longer empty, it was watching, waiting. I turned sharply, my instincts taking over. I needed to leave. Now, my footsteps quickened as I retraced my path, my breath shallow. The corridor felt longer than before, the walls pressing closer, as if the prison itself didn't want me to go. Another noise just behind me, a whisper of movement, too close, too real. I didn't dare look. I broke into a run, my flashlight swinging wildly as I stumbled through the debris. The entrance was just ahead, the cold night air visible through the gap in the doors. As I reached the threshold, I felt it a presence, something unseen brushing against the back of my neck. I shoved through the doors, nearly falling as I spilled into the open. The night was silent, the stars overhead offering no comfort. I turned, my breath ragged, expecting to see something standing in the darkness. But the prison was still, its entrance gaping like an open mouth. Yet deep within, I swore I heard it, a slow, deliberate creak, another door opening. I never went back. Story 25. The slaughterhouse stood on the outskirts of town, a hulking ruin of rusted metal and crumbling concrete. The windows were shattered, jagged glass still clinging to the frames like broken teeth. Vines had crept over the exterior, trying to reclaim what had been left behind. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and something metallic, something that lingered on the edge of familiarity. The floor was slick in places, damp with moisture that shouldn't have been there. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. I moved carefully, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The metal tables were still in place, their surfaces stained dark, the drains beneath them rusted over. Large meat hooks dangled from overhead tracks, casting twisted shadows across the walls. I told myself it was just an old building, just a relic of another time. But the stains along the walls looked too fresh, the deep red of them too stark against the pale concrete. Some dripped down in long streaks, pooling at the base as if whatever had been here had only just been dragged away. A sudden creak made me stop, my breath catching. I turned toward the sound, but the room was still. The chains continued their slow, rhythmic sway, but nothing had moved. I listened, straining to hear beyond the heavy silence. I pressed on, my flashlight sweeping over the empty stalls and broken equipment. A large metal door stood partially open at the far end of the room, leading to what had once been a refrigeration unit. The darkness beyond it was thick, impenetrable, as if it swallowed light rather than reflected it. I hesitated before stepping inside, my fingers trailing along the doorframe. The cold seeped through my skin, a deep chill that didn't belong in an abandoned place. The walls inside were coated with more stains, the pattern of them chaotic, as if something had struggled here. I took another step, and my boots slipped slightly on the floor. When I glanced down, my stomach twisted. A streak of red, glistening under my flashlight, led further inside. It was fresh. It had not been there long. A sharp clatter from behind me made me whirl around. One of the meat hooks had swung violently, the chain rattling against the track above. I hadn't touched it. Nothing had. but it swayed with force, as if something unseen had pushed it. The silence deepened, pressing against me like a weight. My pulse thundered in my ears as I backed away from the hanging hook. The flashlight flickered, casting brief, jagged shadows across the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw something shift, something pulling itself from the darkness. I turned and hurried back the way I had come, my footsteps faster, more urgent. The air grew thicker, the metallic scent sharpening to something unmistakable. A sound followed me, soft, wet, like something dragging itself across the floor. I reached the main area of the slaughterhouse, but it didn't feel as empty as before. The tables, the hooks, the walls, they all seemed to breathe, as if they were waiting. My flashlight caught a glint of something ahead, and I nearly stopped breathing. On the far wall, smeared in deep, fresh red, was a word: stay. The letters dripped, the substance still running, as if the message had just been written. The silence around me felt expectant, as though something unseen was waiting for my response. A deep, echoing groan reverberated through the building, the sound of shifting metal and something heavier. I didn't wait to see what had made it. I ran, my breath coming fast, my footsteps slamming against the blood-slicked floor. The exit was close, but as I neared it, the doors began to swing shut. The old hinges groaned, the metal grinding against the frame as if resisting my escape. I threw my shoulder against the door, shoving it open just enough to squeeze through. The night air was sharp and cold against my skin, but I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. The slaughterhouse loomed behind me, dark and waiting, but I knew I had not been alone in there. Something had been watching. Something had wanted me to stay. Story 26. The factory loomed ahead, its rusted frame barely holding together under years of neglect. Cracked windows lined the upper floors, some shattered completely, leaving jagged edges like broken teeth. The scent of damp metal and decay clung to the air, mixing with the distant smell of stagnant water. Weeds had overtaken the entrance, winding through the cracked pavement like nature reclaiming what had been abandoned. Stepping inside, my footsteps echoed against the hollow metal walls. The vast space stretched out before me, filled with rusted machinery and forgotten debris. The ceiling had partially collapsed in places, letting in shafts of pale, diffused light that barely touched the darkness beyond. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by my presence, swirling in slow, lazy patterns. A set of old conveyor belts stretched along one side, covered in grime and dried leaves. Pieces of scrap metal lay scattered across the floor, their edges corroded and jagged. A few wooden crates stood stacked near a far wall, their surfaces worn smooth from years of exposure. The place was dead, hollow, a forgotten relic of an industry long gone. Then, from somewhere deep in the shadows, I heard muffled voices barely above a whisper. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, straining to listen. The voices weren't clear, but they were close, too close for comfort. Someone else was here. Cautiously, I stepped behind a rusted support beam, peering toward the darker sections of the factory. The voices faded for a moment, replaced by the distant creak of shifting metal. My breath caught as I saw movement figures, barely distinguishable in the gloom, shifting between the machinery. I counted 3, maybe 4, their outlines flickering in the dim light. Panic tightened in my chest. This place should have been abandoned, empty, nothing more than rust and decay. Yet here they were, hidden in the depths of the factory, speaking in hushed tones as if they didn't want to be heard. The realization hit me, whatever they were doing, they didn't want company. I took a slow step back, careful not to disturb the debris beneath my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to slip away before they noticed I was there. But as I moved, my foot caught the edge of a loose metal plate, sending it clattering across the floor. The sound shattered the silence, ringing through the vast emptiness like a gunshot. The voices stopped. A tense, suffocating silence followed, pressing in around me like a weight. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I backed further into the shadows. The soft shuffle of movement came from the direction of the figures, deliberate and slow. They were listening, waiting, searching. A new voice broke the silence, sharp and low. "Did you hear that?" My stomach twisted as another voice responded. "Yeah, someone's here." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and moved as quickly as I dared, stepping lightly over debris and rusted scraps. The exit felt impossibly far, the open doorway nothing more than a dim sliver of light in the distance. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pushed forward, forcing myself not to break into a full sprint. Behind me, footsteps crunched against the floor. They were moving now, faster, closing the distance between us. My mind raced with possibilities. Who were they? Why were they here? And more importantly, what would they do if they caught me? Reaching a cluster of old machinery, I ducked behind a rusted workbench, pressing myself against the cold metal. My hands trembled as I tried to steady my breathing, listening as the footsteps grew closer. They were spreading out, searching, their movements careful and deliberate. A voice spoke again, this time directly ahead of me. "Whoever you are, come out." I stayed silent, my body rigid, willing myself to disappear into the shadows. The figure ahead took another step, their boots scraping against the floor. A flashlight flicked on, its beam sweeping through the darkness, illuminating the dust swirling in the air. I needed to move, now. Keeping low, I shifted toward an old conveyor belt, slipping behind a large metal cabinet. A beam of light passed just inches from my hiding spot, briefly illuminating the edge of my sleeve. My breath caught, but the flashlight continued its sweep, moving past me. One of the figures cursed under their breath. "We don't have time for this. If someone saw us." Another cut them off. "Keep looking. They couldn't have gone far." My mind raced. Whatever they were doing here, it was something they didn't want exposed. The factory wasn't just a forgotten ruin, it was being used for something that required secrecy, and I had stumbled right into it. A sudden crash echoed from the far end of the factory, drawing their attention. One of them barked out a command, and the others moved toward the noise. It was my chance. Heart pounding, I pushed away from my hiding spot, slipping back toward the entrance. The doorway was just ahead, the outside world only a few more steps away. I forced myself to stay calm, to move smoothly, not to run. Running would make noise, and noise would bring them right back to me. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, I broke into a sprint. The fresh air hit me like a shock, but I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran past rusted fences and overgrown weeds, my legs burning as I pushed myself toward the road. Behind me, distant voices shouted, but I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to see them to know they were watching, their shadows lingering at the factory's entrance. I had gotten away, but I knew one thing for certain. The factory wasn't abandoned, and whoever was inside didn't want to be found. Story 27. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering frame silhouetted against the dull gray sky. Ivy curled around the crumbling stone, creeping over the broken windows like fingers grasping at the past. The air was thick with dust and decay, the scent of something long forgotten lingering in the stillness. My footsteps echoed as I crossed the threshold, the floor beneath me groaning in protest. The entryway was grand but abandoned, filled with the remnants of a life left behind. Faded wallpaper peeled in curling sheets, revealing the rotting wood beneath. An old chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals clouded with age, barely reflecting the light that filtered through the dirty windows. Despite the emptiness, I felt watched, as if the house itself was aware of my presence. I moved cautiously through the halls, my fingers trailing along the dust-covered railing of the staircase. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere unseen. Each room I passed told a story of neglect. Torn curtains swayed in a phantom breeze, forgotten furniture sat covered in sheets, and old portraits lined the walls, their subjects long since erased by time. Then I saw it. A family portrait hung at the end of the corridor, untouched by dust or decay. The frame was ornate, its gold trim gleaming unnaturally against the dark wood-paneled wall. The painting itself was eerily lifelike, depicting a man, a woman, and two children standing in front of the very mansion I was now exploring. My stomach tightened as I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The man's sharp jawline and dark eyes mirrored my own, his somber expression one I had seen reflected in the mirror countless times. The woman bore a striking similarity to my mother, her features delicate yet familiar. Even the children, a boy and a girl, looked uncannily like me as a child and a sister I never had. I reached out, my fingers barely grazing the surface of the painting. The moment I touched it, a shiver ran through me, the air suddenly colder, heavier. A creaking sound echoed behind me, the distinct groan of wood shifting beneath weight. I turned sharply, but the hallway was empty, the dust undisturbed. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me, my vision blurring for a moment. The house felt different, as if something unseen had changed, something subtle yet undeniable. The air no longer smelled of dust, but of something richer: aged wood, candle wax, the faintest hint of perfume. I inhaled deeply, confusion settling deep in my bones. Then I heard the whisper. A soft, almost inaudible murmur, like the rustling of fabric or the hush of a breath too close to my ear. My heart pounded, my skin prickling as I turned in circles, searching for the source. But the house remained empty, silent, watching. I forced myself to move, to shake off the unease clawing at my thoughts. Perhaps I was imagining things, letting the eeriness of the place get to me. But as I made my way down the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I reached a grand sitting room, its furniture still arranged as if waiting for its occupants to return. A fireplace sat cold and empty, its hearth littered with ash long since turned to dust. Above it, another portrait hung, smaller but equally unnerving. It was the same family, posed slightly differently, but my eyes seemed sharper now, as if aware of my presence. I backed away, my pulse quickening. The entire house felt wrong, as if the walls themselves breathed, shifting with some unseen force. My head ached, a dull pressure building behind my eyes. The whispering returned, louder this time, threading through the room like a breeze without wind. I turned to leave, to put as much distance between myself and that portrait possible, but the hallway was different now. The wallpaper was no longer peeling, the wooden floors gleamed with polish, and the air no longer held the weight of abandonment. The house was no longer empty. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, a figure lingering near the staircase. My breath caught as I realized I could see her clearly. The woman from the portrait stood at the top of the stairs, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. She didn't move, didn't speak, only stared as if waiting for something. I took a step back, my body tense, my mind racing for an explanation. But there was none. The house had changed, the decay erased as if it had never existed, as if I had stepped through time itself. I turned sharply, my eyes darting to the painting above the fireplace. The family was no longer looking forward. They were looking at me. A cold, paralyzing fear gripped my chest, my breathing shallow and uneven. I stumbled backward, my body screaming for me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The whispering grew louder, no longer a single voice but many, overlapping, pressing into my thoughts. "Come home," they murmured. "You belong here." The room spun, my vision swimming as the walls seemed to close in. I forced my body to move, pushing myself toward the door, toward the exit, away from whatever had claimed this house as its own. My fingers barely brushed the handle before I felt it, a hand, cold and firm, gripping my wrist. I turned, expecting to see the woman from the stairs, but she was gone. The hallway was empty once more, the house returned to its ruined state. My chest heaved as I yanked my hand free, my skin burning where I had been touched. I didn't hesitate. I ran, my footsteps slamming against the wood, sending dust flying in my wake. The front door loomed ahead, slightly ajar, the outside world beckoning. The moment I crossed the threshold, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like cotton. I stumbled down the steps, my legs trembling, my pulse still frantic. The house stood behind me, dark and lifeless, its presence looming despite its stillness. I looked down at my wrist, the faint outline of fingers imprinted on my skin. A reminder, a warning, a claim. The mansion may have let me leave, but I knew deep in my bones I had never truly escaped. Story 28. The forest was quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. My boots crunched against the undergrowth as I followed a narrow, overgrown trail. It wasn't on any map, but something about it drew me in. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was walking into a place long forgotten. Then I saw a metal hatch, half buried beneath tangled roots and dirt. It was rusted and covered in moss, barely visible against the forest floor. My heart pounded as I wiped away the grime, revealing a heavy handle. With a deep breath, I gripped it and pulled. The hatch groaned as it opened, releasing a rush of stale, musty air. A metal ladder descended into darkness, disappearing into what seemed like an underground room. I hesitated for a moment before switching on my flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing concrete walls and a floor coated in dust. Carefully, I climbed down, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. The air was thick and unmoving, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. The room was small, empty except for a metal shelf and a wooden crate in the corner. Everything was coated in dust, undisturbed by time. The crate caught my attention. It was old, its wood warped with age, but still intact. I brushed off the dust and pried it open, revealing a stack of letters tied together with a brittle ribbon. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. My fingers trembled as I untied the bundle. The first letter was dated decades ago, its handwriting neat and deliberate. It spoke of someone seeking refuge, hiding from an unnamed threat. Each letter after that detailed growing paranoia, whispers in the dark, and unseen figures watching from the trees. My stomach twisted as I read. One letter stood out from the rest. It was newer, the ink darker, the handwriting urgent. Unlike the others, it wasn't signed. My breath hitched as I read the final words scrawled across the page. "If you're reading this, leave now. They know you're here." A chill crawled up my spine as I stared at the warning. The words felt too immediate, too direct. My flashlight flickered, the dim light casting shifting shadows along the bunker walls. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in around me. I stuffed the letters back into the crate, my hands unsteady. The air felt heavier now, the walls closer. A faint sound drifted through the open hatch above, a rustling in the trees. My heartbeat quickened as I strained to listen. The forest had been silent before. Slowly, I climbed the ladder, my ears ringing with every creak of the metal rungs. When my head emerged above ground, I scanned the area. The trees stood still, the wind absent, but something felt different. The forest no longer felt empty. I pulled myself up and closed the hatch as quietly as I could. The rusted metal scraped against its frame, the sound too loud in the unnatural stillness. I took a step back, my breath shallow. Then, from somewhere in the trees, a twig snapped. Panic surged through me as I turned toward the trail. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me away from the bunker. The letters, the warning, the feeling of being watched, it all screamed at me to get out. The further I ran, the more the trees blurred around me. Then, the sound of footsteps. Not mine, someone else's. They were close, too close. They didn't match my movements but followed in a deliberate, measured pace. My pulse pounded as I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing but dense trees and shifting shadows. I pushed forward, my lungs burning. The trail ahead twisted, narrowing as branches clawed at my arms. I swore I saw something move between the trees, a dark shape, barely visible. The footsteps grew softer, but I didn't dare stop. After what felt like an eternity, I burst onto the main path, my legs trembling beneath me. The forest felt different here, lighter, safer. I turned back, expecting to see something emerge from the trees. There was nothing, only silence. I forced myself to breathe, my hands shaking as I wiped sweat from my forehead. The warning echoed in my mind, looping over and over. They know you're here. I had no idea who they were, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I walked quickly, keeping my eyes on the trail ahead. Every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing, but nothing followed. When I finally reached my car, I practically collapsed against the door, fumbling for the keys. The moment I was inside, I locked every door. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath uneven. My backpack sat in the passenger seat, heavier than before. Inside, tucked between my gear, was the last letter I had taken from the bunker. I hadn't meant to take it. I didn't even remember grabbing it. My hand shook as I unfolded the letter again. The ink seemed darker now, as if freshly written. My stomach dropped as I read the words one more time. Beneath the original warning, something had been added. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Right. Too late. I dropped the paper, my vision swimming. My mind raced for an explanation, any reason for why the words had changed. My reflection in the rearview mirror was pale, my expression unreadable. Then, movement behind me. A shadow shifted at the edge of the trees. It was far away, barely more than a silhouette, but I knew it was watching. My chest tightened as the figure took a step forward. I didn't wait to see more. The engine roared to life as I slammed my foot on the gas. Gravel kicked up behind me as I tore down the road, the forest shrinking in my rearview mirror. The letter lay crumpled beside me, its final warning burned into my mind. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if the shadow followed. I just drove, putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked. Some things aren't meant to be found. and some mornings come too late. Story 29. The asylum had stood abandoned for decades, its decaying structure looming over the overgrown grounds. I had heard the stories, whispers of strange noises, shadows that moved on their own, but curiosity got the better of me. That evening I slipped through a rusted gap in the fence, my flashlight cutting through the thick fog. The air smelled of damp wood and something stale, like old paper left to rot. Inside, the walls were covered in peeling paint, the remnants of a once sterile white now reduced to a sickly yellow. Rusted gurneys sat in the corners, their wheels seized with age. The hallways stretched endlessly, lined with doorways leading to darkened rooms. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness, each sound bouncing off the broken tiles beneath me. I moved carefully, stepping over shattered glass and debris that had accumulated over the years. Faded patient records were strewn across the floor, their ink barely legible. Some rooms still held rotting furniture, chairs overturned as if someone had left in a hurry. The deeper I went, the more suffocating the silence became, pressing against me like a heavy weight. A draft moved through the corridor, carrying with it the distant sound of rustling paper. I froze, scanning the darkness for movement, but there was nothing. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I pressed on, convincing myself it was just the wind. But something about this place felt too still, too expectant. I found the warden's office at the end of a long hallway, its door hanging half open. Inside, the desk was covered in dust, drawers left ajar as if someone had ransacked them long ago. A rusted filing cabinet stood against the far wall, its contents spilling onto the floor. On the desk, a single sheet of paper lay unfolded, an old map drawn in faded ink. As I brushed the dust away, my breath caught in my throat. My name was scrawled across the bottom in precise, deliberate handwriting. The ink looked fresher than the rest of the map, as if it had been added recently. My pulse quickened as I traced the lines with my fingers, noting the runes marked with X. They weren't random. They matched the exact places I had explored so far. A chill crawled up my spine as I took a step back, my mind racing. Someone had been keeping track of my movements. Someone had known I would come here. The thought sent a wave of nausea through me, and I turned sharply toward the door, suddenly desperate to leave. That was when I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, somewhere in the hallway. I killed the flashlight and held my breath, straining to listen. The sound was faint but unmistakable, the soft creak of weight shifting on old floorboards. I wasn't alone. Panic set in as I looked around the room for another exit, but there was none. The only way out was through the same hallway where the footsteps had come from. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, but the sound never grew louder. Whoever was out there wasn't moving anymore. The silence stretched on, unbearable in its intensity. I took a slow step forward, my shoes barely making a sound against the dust-covered floor. Peering into the hallway, I saw nothing but shadows stretching along the cracked walls. The air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I forced myself to move, keeping close to the wall, my ears straining for any sign of movement. My body screamed at me to run, but I knew that would only make noise. As I reached the end of the corridor, I caught sight of something that made my blood turn to ice. In the dust on the floor, fresh footprints led away from the warden's office, footprints that weren't mine. I hadn't heard anyone run, hadn't seen anyone leave. Whoever had been standing outside had moved without a sound. The realization sent a bolt of terror through me, and I quickened my pace, no longer caring about being quiet. I turned down another hallway, my flashlight flickering as I went. The exit was close now, just down the next corridor. I could make it. I just had to keep going. As I turned the corner, I stopped abruptly. The path ahead was blocked by a heavy metal door, one that hadn't been closed when I entered. My stomach lurched as I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Someone had locked it. The air around me felt colder, pressing against my skin like an unseen force. A whisper echoed through the darkness, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. My name. It was spoken with an eerie familiarity, as if someone had been waiting for me all along. My hand shook as I turned, scanning the hallway, but there was nothing there. Just the endless, yawning dark. I had to find another way out. Turning back, I retraced my steps, forcing myself to stay calm. The walls seemed narrower now, the ceiling lower, as if the building itself was closing in. The whisper came again, closer this time, curling around me like a breath against my ear. A door to my right stood slightly open, revealing a stairwell leading down. I hesitated for only a moment before slipping inside, gripping the railing as I descended. The steps creaked under my weight, the darkness below swallowing the light from my flashlight. At the bottom, I found another hallway, this one lined with rusted doors. Some were ajar, revealing padded cells with rotting restraints. My skin crawled at the sight, but I kept moving, scanning for any sign of an exit. At the far end, I saw a faint sliver of moonlight seeping through a broken window. I broke into a run, my pulse thundering in my ears. As I reached the window, I climbed onto the ledge, gripping the rusted frame. Behind me, something moved, a soft shuffling that sent ice down my spine. I didn't turn to look. I didn't want to see what was there. With a final push, I forced myself through the window, landing hard on the ground outside. The cold night air filled my lungs, but I didn't stop. I ran across the overgrown grass, not daring to glance back until I reached the fence. When I finally did, the asylum loomed in the darkness, its empty windows staring back at me. My flashlight flickered weakly in my trembling hands, and I could still feel the whisper against my skin. The map, the footprints, the locked door. Someone had been waiting for me. And whoever they weren't finished watching. Story 30. The tunnel stretched endlessly before me, the air thick with damp rot and something fouler beneath it. My flashlight beam wavered against the slimy walls, revealing rusted pipes that dripped steadily into the stagnant pools below. The old sewer system had been abandoned for decades, sealed off from the public, and left to decay beneath the city. Curiosity had drawn me here, but now, deep within its twisting passages, I wasn't sure I had made the right choice. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the distant echo of water trickling through unseen cracks. My boots sloshed through the filth, each step sending ripples through the murky water. The deeper I ventured, the more the tunnels narrowed, forcing me to duck beneath low, hanging beams slick with moisture. The walls bore faded markings, strange symbols etched into the concrete, their meanings lost to time. As I turned a corner, my light caught something unusual, a rusted metal door set into the wall, its edges sealed with layers of grime. Unlike the rest of the sewer, this door looked intentionally hidden, as if someone had tried to erase its existence. I wiped at the surface, revealing faint letters barely visible beneath the rust. The words were too corroded to read, but the unease curling in my stomach told me this was no ordinary maintenance room. The handle resisted at first, groaning against years of disuse before finally giving way. A gust of stale air rushed past me, heavy with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. The room beyond was small, its walls lined with cracked tiles that bore the scars of age. But it was the object at the center that made my breath catch. A mirror stood against the far wall, its glass fractured by deep, jagged cracks. The silvered surface was warped, the frame dulled by years of neglect. Yet despite its damage, the mirror reflected the room perfectly except for one thing. The figure staring back at me wasn't my own. My pulse pounded as I took a hesitant step forward, my reflection unmoving. The face in the glass was similar to mine, but wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Its eyes were darker, sunken as if hollowed from within. A faint smirk curled its lips, though my own remained still. I lifted my hand, but the figure hesitated before mirroring me, its movements a fraction too slow. A deep chill settled into my bones, the weight of something unseen pressing against my skin. I wanted to turn away, to leave the room and never look back, but I couldn't move. The reflection's smirk widened, its head tilting at an unnatural angle as if studying me in return. The longer I stared, the more I realized the cracks in the glass weren't random. They spread out like veins, pulsing faintly as if alive. Then, without warning, the figure in the mirror stepped forward. Not a reflection, an actual step, pressing against the fractured barrier as if testing its strength. My breath hitched, my body locking in place as the glass trembled. A single, hairline crack splintered outward, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. I stumbled back, my foot catching on loose debris as I nearly lost my balance. The mirror shuddered violently, its surface rippling like disturbed water. The figure's hand pressed harder, its fingers stretching through the glass as if the barrier between us was no longer solid. A faint whisper curled through the air, a sound that came not from the tunnel but from inside my own skull. "Let me out." The word sent a jolt of terror through me, my instincts finally screaming for me to run. I turned and bolted for the door, my flashlight swinging wildly as I crashed into the rusted frame. Behind me, the mirror groaned, the cracks spreading like lightning, deepening with an unnatural force. The air grew thick, pressing against me as if something enormous was pushing its way into the room. I shoved against the door, my fingers scrabbling at the rusted handle. The whispering grew louder, turning into a guttural murmur, each word overlapping in a nightmarish chant. Just as the glass let out a deafening crack, I wrenched the door open and threw myself into the tunnel. The sound of shattering glass exploded behind me, followed by a rush of air so cold it burned my skin. I ran, my breath ragged, my heart slamming against my ribs. The tunnel twisted and stretched before me, my light flickering as I darted through the stagnant water. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, growing clearer with every step. "You brought me back." My vision blurred as I pushed forward, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that room as possible. The tunnels felt endless now, each turn unfamiliar, the walls closing in. My flashlight wavered, its beam dimming until the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Then ahead, I saw an exit. I surged forward, my muscles burning as I reached the rusted ladder leading up to the surface. The whispers clawed at my mind, their voices shifting, blending into one. My hands trembled as I gripped the rungs, pulling myself upward with all the strength I had left. As I reached the top, I slammed against the metal grate, shoving it aside before crawling out into the cold night air. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, my limbs shaking uncontrollably. The entrance to the sewer gaped below, a black void stretching into nothingness. For a moment, all was silent again. No whispers, no movement, just the distant hum of the city above. Then, from the darkness below, I heard it. The faintest sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, rising from the depths. I scrambled to my feet, shoving the grate back into place, my hands slick with sweat. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I stepped back, watching, waiting. But nothing emerged. The night stretched on, the city oblivious to what lay beneath its streets. I turned, my body aching, my mind racing with what I had seen. But as I took a final glance at my reflection in a nearby puddle, my breath caught in my throat. The face staring back at me wasn't my own.